Please excuse us, my mother-in-law said. My daughter is a med student, and her studies keep her very busy. On the day of the engagement party, there was an empty seat on my husband's side. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law noticed my gaze and approached, looking quite apologetic. I told her she needed to be here, my husband Kenneth said, expressing his frustration with his sister and apologizing to my family. We smiled and reassured them, saying, "Don't worry about it." Seeing our understanding, my mother-in-law added, "We hope you'll get along well with our daughter too." I nodded, "Yes, of course." At that moment, I didn't think too much of it. Since my in-laws and Kenneth had left a good impression, I assumed his sister would be the same. My name is Holly, and I'm 33 years old. Kenneth and I registered our marriage 2 months ago and are planning to have our wedding ceremony next year. Around the time of our engagement party, my mother fell ill and was hospitalized. I wanted to wait until she fully recovered so she could see me in the wedding dress she had always dreamed of. In the meantime, I decided to embrace my role as a housewife. Before getting married, I worked as a doctor in a hospital. However, the demanding nature of the job took a toll on my mental and physical health, affecting both my work and personal life. Although I couldn't leave my patients immediately, I eventually resigned from the hospital on the advice of others. Perhaps a large hospital wasn't the right fit for me. During a period when I felt inadequate and embarrassed about my career, I met and married Kenneth. Raised in an ordinary family, he was surprised to learn I was a former doctor but saw me for who I was beyond my profession. "I'll work hard to keep you smiling," he would say, heading to work diligently every day. For him, I dedicated myself to cooking and housework. Thanks to Kenneth, I can now live my life with a smile. As my health gradually improved, I began considering re-entering the workforce using my medical license. However, amidst our happy life, one thing concerned me: my sister-in-law, whom I had never met. According to my in-laws, she's a busy med student. We were supposed to meet at the engagement party, but she couldn't attend due to her studies. Having passed her exams on the first try, she must be quite capable. Since Kenneth and I registered our marriage around the same time as the party, we missed the chance to meet her. I hoped we could eventually greet each other. One day, Kenneth and I went out to the city. We enjoyed looking at furniture and matching dinnerware together. As we were thinking of taking a break, a voice called out, "Isn't that Kenneth?" Kenneth turned around, and I followed his gaze. A flashy young woman stood there, dressed in a low-cut dress and high-heeled pumps with a strong perfume scent. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" Kenneth asked. The woman named Rachel scrutinized me, making me feel uncomfortable. Kenneth introduced her to me. "Holly, this is your first time meeting her, right? This is my sister, Rachel. So this is her." "Nice to meet you, I'm Holly," I said, politely greeting my sister-in-law. She was different from what I had imagined, but I reminded myself not to judge people by their appearance. As I reflected on this, Rachel laughed mockingly. "Oh, so you're already married. Wow, Kenneth, you're handsome and have a high income, but you married such a plain woman. That's just weird." I was taken aback by her blatantly rude comment on our first meeting. It was true that Kenneth, 4 years younger than me, was good-looking and worked for a major pharmaceutical company, earning an above-average income. While strangers might think we were mismatched, I couldn't understand how she could say such things to my face. Sensing the tension, Kenneth stepped forward to defend me and scolded Rachel. "Hey, don't say such rude things. You should properly greet her, especially since you missed the engagement party due to your own convenience." Rachel laughed it off without any concern. "Well, I had a mixer to go to after a long time." Wait, wasn't she supposed to be busy with her studies? Shocked by the reason for her absence, I decided to try and mediate, worried that this could escalate into a heated argument between my husband and his sister. Well, we're meeting today, so that's good, right, Rachel? I look forward to getting along with you." Rachel glared at me. "What do you do anyway?" "I'm going to be a doctor, you know. Don't get too familiar with me." Her aura of "I'm important, I'm special" was overwhelming. I've encountered many people with high pride, but she was exceptional. I tried to calm Kenneth, who was about to yell, and replied, "I'm currently a housewife. I used to be." But Rachel interrupted me before I could finish. "A housewife? That's just like being unemployed. Unemployed people are society's garbage, and now you're my sister-in-law? Seriously? Oh, are you just a parasite living off my brother's money?" I felt my cheeks twitch involuntarily. In Rachel's mind, housewives seemed equivalent to unemployed people, which was an extreme view. My attempt to keep the peace had clearly backfired. Rachel, enough. Holly isn't the kind of person you think, Kenneth said, stepping in to defend me. It's okay, Kenneth, I said, calming him down. Even though our interaction was brief, I felt I understood what kind of person Rachel was. She must be intelligent, having passed her exams on the first try and keeping up with her credits, but her personality left much to be desired. Being a doctor is a wonderful profession indeed. It's a tough journey, but good luck with it, I said, smiling warmly. Ah, what do you know? I don't need your fake advice. Oh, and by the way, I'm still a student, so I'll pass on giving a wedding gift, thanks. My husband seemed too tired to get angry anymore. Just go, he said, gesturing as if shooing away an animal. Rachel complained in response. I came to say hi, but what a bad attitude. Well, whatever, I'm busy too, she said, before turning and walking away. After Rachel disappeared from sight, Kenneth deeply apologized to me. I'm really sorry about my sister. I can't believe she said all those rude things. She used to be more reasonable, I said, shaking my head. It's okay. Honestly, my impression of Rachel was nearly the worst, but it's better than having a fight because of me. We managed to exchange greetings, and from now on, I just need to keep my distance. Thank you for defending me so many times. You know what? Let's change our mood and have some coffee. I'm craving some delicious coffee. I smiled and Kenneth nodded, looking relieved. A few days later, I visited a large hospital nearby, carrying a tote bag with flowers and a change of clothes. I reached for the door of a private room. Mom, it's Holly. How are you feeling? I called as I opened the door. My mother smiled happily from her bed. I regularly visited her to help with her clothes and personal care. Today, she seemed to be in pretty good spirits. In place of my mother, my brother Andrew, removing his stethoscope, answered. He works as a doctor at this hospital and keeps a close eye on our mother's condition. Seeing his familiar face always brings a smile to mine. It's been a while, Andrew, he said, smiling as he continued to record our mother's progress. I set down my tote bag and took a seat on the round chair beside her bed. Dad was here a moment ago, but he left for a conference. Bad timing. It would have been nice if the whole family could have been together. What a pity, my mother chuckled. This hospital is actually run by my father. I used to work here as a doctor just like him and Andrew. It feels strange being here, a place that's both my family home and former workplace. After enjoying a chat, my mother, feeling sleepy from her medication, said, I think the medicine is working. I'm feeling a bit drowsy, and started to drift off. After tucking her in, my brother said, seeing both of us might have comforted her. We smiled at each other and left the room quietly. My brother and I sat down on a couch in the lobby. How are things with Kenneth? Are you two getting along? He asked. I nodded. Yes, we're having a good time every day. He laughed and patted my head. Ever since I was young, he's always been overly concerned about me, and that hasn't changed even after my marriage. Everyone in our family was worried when you left the hospital. Meeting Kenneth was the best thing that happened to you, I think. I've been able to recover because of Kenneth's presence. While we were chatting, a nurse called my brother away. I'll be right back, just wait here for a bit. I nodded and watched him go to attend to a patient. He's usually busy, second only to our father, the director. It's almost miraculous that we had time to chat. I would have been helping out at the hospital just like my dad and brother if things had been different. Feeling slightly gloomy, I sighed. Hey, what's the unemployed Holly doing here? A familiar loud voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see my sister-in-law Rachel standing there, looking down at me with a malicious smile. Her emphasis on unemployed irked me, but I maintained a polite smile. Hi, Rachel. I came to visit my mom today. You know we're in a hospital, so it's better to keep your voice down. Feeling uncomfortable at this encounter, I inwardly groaned. Rachel ignored my subtle hint and continued to speak loudly. Wow, your mom's hospitalized. I came here for clinical training today, Rachel said. From her attire, I had somewhat guessed that might be the case. It's not unusual considering she's a med student at a nearby university, but I wish I hadn't run into her. Even so, her appearance is a bit off. I discreetly glanced at Rachel's outfit and couldn't help but feel dismayed. Though not as extreme as the last time we met, her makeup was still flashy and her loosely tied hair was casual. I wondered if she understood the need for a more professional appearance. When I worked as a doctor, I wore makeup too, but I always prioritized cleanliness and kept it subtle to avoid discomforting the patients. Doesn't anyone advise her on this? Glancing around, I noticed several medical students and doctors, many of whom were my former colleagues, looking pale and uneasy behind her. Most of these doctors knew me well, and the medical students, upon being whispered to, seemed to realize that I am the daughter of the hospital director. To them, Rachel must appear as a reckless med student offending the director's daughter, her loud voice disrupting the hospital's decorum. I tried to suggest moving elsewhere. Rachel, please keep your voice down. It's disturbing. Rachel exaggeratedly sighed and interrupted me. A woman like you, unemployed and catching a high-income man like my brother, must be a relief to your mother, right? I bet you're making him pay for your mother's hospital bills, aren't you? Just like a trashy family would. She smirked, making it seem like I was some sort of embarrassment in front of everyone. Her awful words shocked not only the nearby doctors and medical students but also the passing patients who frowned. Being publicly called unemployed and having my innocent mother insulted was too much for me. Hey, enough is enough. One of the doctors, unable to stand it any longer, stepped in to stop Rachel, but she wouldn't listen. She deserves to be spoken to like this. Rachel laughed. The doctor who intervened furrowed his brow at Rachel's remark and left, muttering, "Your life is over, kid." Rachel seemed clueless about what that meant. Then my brother Andrew, who had finished his work, came back. Seeing the tension between Rachel and me and sensing the strange atmosphere, he looked puzzled. "Ah, Andrew." Rachel's attitude changed drastically with Andrew's arrival, and I was taken aback. She was the epitome of putting on a facade. She changed her tone and started cozying up to my brother. I couldn't help but notice that even her facial expression seemed to alter. Andrew is young, talented, and handsome, even from his sister's biased view. Being the successor to her father, he's quite popular. I instantly realized that Rachel was aiming for him. "Holly, what's going on?" Andrew asked, addressing me by name, to which Rachel glared at me. "Andrew, are you close with her?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. Calling the doctor at her training site by his first name was appalling. Andrew distanced himself from Rachel and casually replied, "Well, yes." Rachel, apparently unhappy with his response, persisted annoyingly. "But she's married, you know. You weren't aware of that, right? Andrew, you're popular. You should be careful." Her sugary nasal voice was irritating. She seemed to mistake me for a rival aiming for Andrew. "I know, she's my sister, after all." At Andrew's words, Rachel froze. "What? What?" I struggled to contain my laughter at Rachel's stunned expression. While Rachel stood there dumbfounded, the medical student who had intervened earlier whispered in Andrew's ear, likely explaining the whole situation. Andrew's expression turned stern in an instant. "Wait, so Holly is the daughter of the director of this hospital?" As Rachel looked confused, I nodded. "Yes, I'm his daughter. I originally worked here as a doctor. I had to quit due to health issues. Now I'm recovering and temporarily putting my efforts into being the housewife." Rachel turned pale at my words. I had heard from Kenneth that she was hoping to get a job at this hospital. She must realize now that after insulting my mother and me, and with my brother hearing it, her chances of employment here are bleak, and so are her dreams of marrying into wealth. I glanced at Andrew's profile and smiled inwardly. "She's unbelievable as a person," Andrew muttered quietly. It seemed he never had any interest in Rachel in the first place. "Rachel seems to be quite excellent as a medical student," I continued. At my words, Rachel visibly flinched. To easily label people as social garbage or belittle them, that's a problem not just as a doctor, but as a human being. Unless you realize what that problem is, you're not qualified to be a doctor. Reflect on that. The people around nodded in agreement with my admonishing tone. Lectured by me, whom she had mocked, and disappointed by Andrew, whom she admired, it must have been a series of embarrassments for her. However, I didn't want her to become a doctor as she was. Doctors not only bear responsibility for lives but also need to empathize with people's hearts, I believe. "Ha! I don't get it," Rachel muttered, feeling uncomfortable with the atmosphere. She turned and hurried away. "Don't run in the hospital," scolded a passing nurse. Startled, Rachel took a spectacular fall. Andrew and I exchanged glances and laughed, resigned to the absurdity of the situation. Half a year passed. Rachel, already known for her bad character, became completely isolated after ridiculing me in the hospital. Her pride led her to heavy drinking, which resulted in a severe injury and hospitalization. Ironically, she was now being cared for by the very doctors she aspired to join. Finally, understanding her own arrogance, she expressed regret and a desire to apologize to me, as I heard from my in-laws. She decided to take a break from medical school and planned to start afresh after her discharge, but it would be a thorny path for her. Meanwhile, I secured a new job as a medical doctor at a pharmaceutical company. My role involves researching and developing medications as well as verifying the safety of new drugs. My father and brother asked if I would return to the hospital, but I wanted to try something new. My mother's health improved enough for home care, and she's looking forward to attending our wedding next year.
My name is Mary. I turned 35 this year on a warm summer day when birds were chirping happily. One day, I was asked to go to the president's office. The president is actually my mom. I'd accidentally called her mom instead of boss because I was surprised. She seemed annoyed by the heat and didn't even look at me when she spoke. She said she's giving the company to my sister and firing me. It was hard to believe what I heard because the sun was so bright. I probably looked really shocked. My mom, looking frustrated, finally looked at me and repeated that I'm fired because she doesn't want me around since I'm not as attractive as my sister. She said I had to leave by the end of the month. Then she went back to her work as if our conversation was over. I felt confused and hurt as I sat there, listening to the birds outside. My mom even scolded me for still being there and told me to go back to work. I walked away from the office feeling like a robot, saying excuse me as I left and closing the door behind me. Our company is pretty small, just a 2-story building, and we're in the demolition business with about 10 people working here. It's a family business, with my mom as the president, my aunt and her husband as the top managers, and my mom's cousins as other important managers, but my mom always had the most control. After I finished high school, I got a job at an accounting firm. But when I turned 25, my mom said we needed an accountant at our family business. She basically guilted me into joining, saying I shouldn't abandon my family. And when I started, I didn't just do accounting work. My mom gave me all sorts of jobs, from paperwork to sales, whenever we were short-staffed. Basically, I did a bit of everything at the company. Even though the work was tough, I tried my best not to be a burden to anyone. I worked long hours and somehow managed to keep up with everything for the past 10 years. On the other hand, my sister Lucy, who was supposed to take over the company, is 3 years younger than me at 32, and she only started working here 2 years ago. Lucy had been jumping from one job to another, always saying they weren't right for her. When she turned 30, she stopped looking for work and spent her days relaxing at home. Then, my mom decided Lucy should work at our family business and made her an executive director. Even though I've been working at the company for 10 years, I'm still just a regular employee. Everyone noticed how differently my sister and I were treated, but I wasn't surprised. My mom has always liked Lucy more, even when we were kids. She gave Lucy all the nice clothes and toys she wanted and always said how cute she was. But I got hand-me-downs and wasn't paid much attention to. As a child, I didn't understand why my mom treated us differently. I worked hard in school and helped out at home, hoping to get her attention. But even when I got top grades, she barely noticed. At one point, I even thought about getting plastic surgery because I believed that if I looked prettier, my mom would pay more attention to me. But my aunt, who is my mom's sister, saw me feeling this way and explained why my mom ignored me so much. When I was in high school, I was told that my dad had died. But the truth was, when Lucy was born, my dad left my mom for another woman from his job. This woman was older than my mom and supposedly not as pretty, but she had a similar vibe to me. My aunt told me that my mom was too proud to admit that my dad left her for someone who wasn't as attractive as she was. She seemed kind of satisfied telling me this, like she enjoyed seeing my mom in a tough spot. My aunt wasn't particularly stunning herself. She took more after our side of the family, but she was good at her job and often used her charm to get ahead. My mom took over the family business when she was 32, after my dad left. She used her looks to attract and keep lots of clients, which really helped the business grow. Plus, there was a lot of demand for demolition work at that time because many buildings needed tearing down. So my aunt's family and my cousins couldn't really stand up to my mom. Lately, the cost of getting rid of industrial waste and moving it around has gone up, and it's been hard to balance how much it costs to demolish buildings with what we actually make. Our company isn't the only one struggling. The whole industry is having a tough time. It's been a challenge just to pay our employees every month. And now, my younger sister has joined the company as an executive director, adding to the mix. I wondered how my mom planned to pay my sister's salary, but she just said, We'll cut your pay to cover hers. We're family, so it's natural, right? I pointed out that even if they cut my pay, it wouldn't be enough to give my sister the salary of an executive director. But my mom didn't care. She told me it was my problem to figure out. I timidly suggested that maybe my sister should start as a regular employee. My mom gave me a harsh look and scolded me, saying, "Who do you think you're talking to? This isn't your business to interfere with." At that time, we all lived together. My sister didn't contribute anything to the household, while I paid $1,500 each month to help out. I've been helping around the house since I was young to support my busy mom, but my sister never did anything, acting like it was normal. "Hey sis, is dinner ready yet?" Lucy would ask when I was working late. When I told her to make her own food because I was busy, she'd say, "But I don't know what to cook. You're the one who knows the kitchen best, right?" I don't want to get in trouble for using it without asking like last time. She never bothered to try cooking. Instead, she used that past argument as an excuse to avoid doing anything around the house. So, I often had to rush home to cook dinner before going back to work. My mom usually didn't cook either. Even when I made meals, she often ate out, choosing whatever she wanted. Lately though, she was going out to eat with Lucy more, so I didn't have to cook as often. But now, we were spending more money on entertainment, which was causing new problems. My mom, who was now 63, was starting to complain more about feeling sore and the effects of drinking too much. It was around this time that I was called into the CEO's office and told, "I'm giving the company to Lucy. You, who aren't as pretty, are fired." I could understand why my mom chose Lucy to take over the company, considering her past behavior. Lucy was 32, the same age my mom was when she became the CEO. Maybe my mom thought Lucy could use her looks to get things done, just like she did. But I couldn't accept being fired because of how I look. Even if my salary went to Lucy, it didn't seem fair. When I talked to my aunt about it, she already knew Lucy was going to be the CEO, but she didn't know I was getting fired. After thinking about it, my aunt said, "I'm not sure, but it seems like Lucy doesn't like that whenever she says she'll do something at the company. Everyone says it's okay because they know Mary will help. Maybe that's part of the reason." "No, it's because everyone stopped asking Lucy for help since she always does a messy job, right?" Lucy was really bad at her job. She often missed deadlines, messed up phone calls, and made lots of mistakes in her work. Even though she had some experience, she didn't seem to realize how bad she was. Maybe because people always overlooked her mistakes because she was pretty, she never thought about improving. My aunt agreed, saying, "That's true. But I think Lucy sees you as a bother." She added sadly, "But I never imagined they'd fire you. Without you, the company won't be able to work properly." She seemed worried, but didn't argue with my mom, because she knew she wouldn't win. I felt disgusted knowing my aunt was related to me by blood. "So basically, both my mom and sister hate me, right?" I said bitterly. My aunt didn't know what to say, so she suggested, "Well, your mom is terrible, but maybe you'd be better off working somewhere else with all your skills. It's a waste to stay here." Standing in the car, bathed in the red glow of the summer evening, I stared into the distance and felt a sense of relief. Maybe it was okay to let go. I turned to my aunt and said, "You're right," with a big smile on my face. It was the first time I'd smiled genuinely since I started working at the company. My aunt looked a bit confused by my smile, but she returned a sad smile. As I worked on handing over documents and organizing files so that anyone could understand them, the end of the month came quickly. When I went to the CEO's office to resign on time, the sound of birds was gone, and my mom and sister were happily chatting. "That sales guy definitely has a crush on you." "You, that bald guy?" "No way." They laughed loudly, not realizing I was there. When I cleared my throat, they finally noticed me. My sister looked at me curiously and said, "What's up?" "We don't need dinner tonight. I'm quitting today." "Thanks for everything," I told them. "Oh, was it today?" "I forgot." My sister laughed again. I felt relieved knowing I wouldn't have to see them anymore. "I'm moving out too, so take care," my mom replied mechanically, with no emotion. I closed the door, and from inside, I heard my sister say, "Now we won't have to deal with that annoying face anymore." In my heart, I whispered, "Just you wait," and left the company I'd been at for so long. A week later, after finishing some paperwork for school, I checked my phone and saw 14 missed calls from my mom in just 2 hours. I didn't call her back because I had a bad feeling about it. I put my phone on silent and went home after finishing my other tasks. The missed calls from my mom kept piling up, and when I checked the next morning, there were a total of 80 missed calls. The last one was after 2 a.m. But I didn't even consider calling her back. She was like a stranger to me now, and I didn't want to hear her voice at all. I even had thoughts that if I heard her voice, I might end up doing what she wanted. After all, she had controlled me for 35 years. So I ignored her calls with all my strength, trying to break free from her influence. I could have blocked her number, but I thought keeping the calls might be evidence of her behavior if something happened. At first, getting almost 100 calls a day was tough, and I hated seeing them come in. But over time, I started feeling satisfied, imagining my mom's frustration with each unanswered call. It made me realize just how badly she had treated me. The year went by like this, and eventually the calls from my mom stopped. I had no idea what was going on with her. During this time, I worked part-time while studying online to become a tax professional, and I passed all the exams. I recently got a job at a top tax consulting firm. My experience in the very tasks I did at my mom's company helped me see the bigger picture, which was a big advantage in my new job. I was grateful for all the hard work I'd done at my old company over the past 10 years, especially now. The people at my new job are great, and we all work together well. It's a big change from my old job. When I was left to figure things out on my own, pushed around by my mom and sister, I spent countless nights researching and working alone. One day, while I was leading a fulfilling life, I had to visit a client near my mom's company. As I passed by, I noticed the windows were dirty and the plants I used to care for were withered. On my way back, I bumped into my mom coming out of her company. When she saw me, she shouted, "Ah!" and rushed towards me. Expecting her to scold me, I instinctively covered my face with my bag. But to my surprise, she spoke to me in a sweet tone, asking where I'd been and if I changed my phone. It seemed like she hadn't even considered that I might not want to talk to her because I disliked her. Given everything she'd done to me, I couldn't help but wonder about her thought process. Ignoring my confusion, she continued, "Oh, but it's a good thing I saw you. Look at the state of this company. It's awful, isn't it? You can start working here again from tomorrow. I'm not mad, you know. So I forgive you for leaving a year ago. Please come back to work tomorrow." It took me a moment to process what my mom had just said. Did she only see me as a little child who adored her? Mom, I'm already working at another company, and I'm happy there," I said hesitantly. But instead of understanding, her face twisted into anger, and she yelled, "What? You're telling me you're working somewhere else while our company is struggling? I don't care about other companies, you belong to me, got it?" Causing a scene in the street. "Wait a minute, you're the one who fired me, remember? What about Lucy? What happened to her?" I asked. My mom snorted and said, "Oh, Lucy. I thought she'd be useful, but she got caught having affairs with 3 men from our main client. Our business with them ended quickly. I tried putting her in clerical work, but she couldn't even clean properly and was useless at accounting. Because of her, we couldn't even hire someone else." After venting her frustrations, my mom turned to me with a grin. "That's why it's your turn, Mary. Ever since you left, the office has been a mess. I need you to take responsibility." I had made a thorough handover manual before leaving and explained everything to Lucy. But I doubted Lucy had even looked at it, and I was sure my mom hadn't heard anything about it either. And even if she did, she'd probably pretend to forget. I couldn't understand why they fired me and then expected me to clean up their mess. This was typical of these women. They acted tough, blamed others, and made others clean up after them. It was their usual trick. I bit my lip, thinking of the kind people I worked with now, and I swore to myself that I wouldn't succumb to this pressure anymore. "You're the one who fired me, right?" I said to my mom, my tone changing. "And you fired me because I'm not pretty, isn't that right?" A crowd had gathered around us, intrigued by our argument. My mom seemed startled by my sudden assertiveness. "Did I say that? Are you sure you didn't misunderstand?" she stammered, aware of the onlookers. "No, I heard it loud and clear. You're giving the company to my beautiful sister and firing me, the ugly one," I declared boldly. "I don't get it. I've been working hard at the company for 10 years, but you suddenly decide to give the company to my sister, who hardly does any work, after just 2 years. Your judgment is questionable," I stated firmly. The crowd started to murmur in response. "Can that really happen? That's not fair. Are they even related? Is she her own mother?" Some even started filming us, but I was too angry to care. As my mom began to sweat and pale under the accusing stares, she panicked. "Mary, you're misunderstanding." "Let's go inside," she urged. "Misunderstanding? What's there to misunderstand?" "If you didn't say it, just say it clearly," I retorted. When my mom stayed silent, the people around us started saying, "She's silent, so it must be true." "That's unbelievable." Then something snapped in my mom. She started yelling, "Shut up. It's all your fault for being ugly and miserable. Ugly people should know their place and obey what beautiful people say. That's all you're good for." People around us were shocked by my mom's outrageous behavior and quickly started uploading their videos. The headlines read, "Ugly woman obeys beautiful woman." The video went viral, reaching my mom's clients, who promptly cut ties with her. It turned out that in the year after I left the company, they were involved in shady activities like fraud and tampering with accounting books. When the video spread, everyone was eager to distance themselves. As a result, the company went bankrupt. My mom and sister, now without income, came to my apartment, but I didn't let them in. In the end, they moved to a rundown apartment without a bath, living in fear of creditors. My sister, always trying to take it easy by flirting with male coworkers, had trouble keeping part-time jobs because her coworkers didn't like her. Meanwhile, everyone knew about the viral video, so my mom was also shunned by her coworkers. It seems she's now silently working by herself. Meanwhile, I found a boyfriend at my new workplace. He's not conventionally handsome, but he appreciates my hard work and sincerity. We're planning to get married soon. I'm genuinely happy knowing that my efforts have paid off. A funeral dress with a skirt that's too revealing makes me angry. It seems like you're trying to attract men by wearing it. I'm tired of my husband's unfair thoughts. I want a divorce. I'm leaving this house. My name is Kate, and I'm 40 years old. I love chocolate a lot and often end up eating a whole family-sized bar by myself without realizing it. I used to fight with my sister over chocolate when we were younger. Looking back, I wasn't always a mature big sister, but I've seen adults who act even less mature than I did when I was 25. Back then, I had just married my husband, Kevin, who worked at a bank. We met through a friend and got married after about 6 months of dating. Everyone thought I had a perfect life. But things changed after we got married. Every day, when Kevin came home from work, I would greet him and ask about dinner. If it wasn't ready, he'd get upset. So, I made sure to come home before him, cook dinner, and clean up. It was a bit annoying, but Kevin's good salary allowed us to live in a nice house and have a comfortable life. I thought it was normal to have little arguments in a marriage, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But Kevin's behavior kept getting worse. Despite being married, I still visited my parents often, especially to see my 14-year-old sister who was much younger than me. Since our parents worked a lot, I felt like I raised her most of the time. It wasn't because my parents ignored her, but because I loved her so much and wanted to take care of her. My sister was often sick and had to stay in the hospital. Sometimes the doctors would say she might not make it through the night. Thinking about losing her made me love her even more. That's why even after I got married, I continued to visit my sister when she was out of school. But my husband didn't like it. He would say things like, "Who is more important, me or your sister? When a woman gets married, she should focus on her husband's family. My mother never acted like this. You're not doing your duty as a wife." He'd go on like this for almost an hour. None of my friends were married at the time, so when I talked to a senior coworker about my husband, she said, "It's your responsibility. When you're married, you have to prioritize your husband." I thought that's how it was supposed to be. Looking back, I realized I was naive. But even then, I couldn't imagine not seeing my sister. My sister's health was getting worse, and she was in the hospital again, only allowed short visits in a sterile room. It's natural for a family to want to be together in times like these. Sometimes, I'd even take a day off from work to go see her, and I started going to the hospital even on days when my husband was off. But my husband strongly disagreed with this. One day, out of the blue, he invited his mother, my mother-in-law, over to our house. With her there, he confronted me. "What are you even thinking? I work hard to take care of our home, and you can't even do that properly. You're just hopeless. I've told you so many times not to wear skirts, yet you still do. It's inappropriate for a married woman to wear a skirt. What's the problem with me wearing the clothes I like? And this dress was chosen by my sister. I can't just give up on it. See, there you go again, always bringing up your sister Kate. You should be caring more about me." After all, who do you think supports you? Hey, I work too. You can't just claim you're the only one providing. This argument isn't getting us anywhere. Listen, I've already called your workplace and told them you're quitting. You should be thankful. From now on, your focus will be on taking care of the house. What are you talking about? You can't make decisions like this without asking me first. I'm not going to listen to you. Starting today, you're going to live with my mom. Maybe then you'll learn how to be a proper wife. I don't understand what's gotten into you. You're acting irrationally. Shut up. The angry husband smashed a glass on the floor and continued to throw things around in his rage. Seeing the broken glass made me truly scared of my husband for the first time. I regretted marrying him, wondering how I ended up with someone like him. Later, I tried to cancel my resignation with my company, but they told me not to cause any trouble. It turned out my husband had demanded my resignation in a way that was almost abusive, so I lost my job and had to stay at home as my husband wanted. When I told him I quit my job as he wished, he apologized with a smile, saying he might have gone too far. But after seeing his true nature, I couldn't trust his apology. The next day, my husband surprised me by bringing home a group of his coworkers. He proudly introduced me, saying, I wanted to show off my lovely wife. And his colleagues joined in, praising my appearance. Then, out of the blue, he declared, my wife is an amazing cook. You have to taste her food before you leave. I panicked, realizing we didn't have enough food for everyone. It's fine, just make something simple. I don't want you to stress out, he reassured me. I can go shopping if we need more ingredients, one of his female coworkers offered. Your husband really cares about you. I'm jealous, he added. No, he's just good at putting on a show. If he really cared, he wouldn't have brought his coworkers home after a big fight yesterday. I thought bitterly to myself as I started cooking with my mother-in-law. After about 3 hours of eating and drinking, his coworkers finally left. Hi, you. What? I instinctively replied, feeling nervous about what might happen next, given his grumpy mood. I was anxious, afraid he might explode like the day before. Can't you be a bit happier? Seems like I'm not teaching my wife properly, he criticized. I couldn't understand what I did wrong, but I didn't dare to argue. I was too scared. I'm sorry, I mumbled, feeling defeated. Even a child can apologize, he scoffed. Mom, give her a score for today. He turned to his mother for backup. Well, she's not doing a good job supporting her husband, is she? I can't give her any score, his mother replied. Haha, see, even my mom agrees. She can't even give you a score. How funny is that? My husband laughed and lightly tapped me. And about the meal, I tasted a bit. But didn't Kevin find it unsatisfactory? He continued. That's right, Mom. Keep it coming. And what about her clothes? There were men among the colleagues, but she's showing too much skin. What do you think? As a woman, it's indecent to expose your collarbone. She should cover it with a scarf or turtleneck, he added. Whose fault is it that his colleagues suddenly invaded our house and I had to cook without even having time to change my clothes? I retorted. It's Kevin's, I concluded. I couldn't understand why I was constantly being criticized so harshly. She really is something, isn't she? Despite my efforts to teach her every day, she just doesn't seem to learn. Maybe she's just not very smart, my husband remarked. No doubt about it, his mother agreed. That day, I endured a lecture for nearly 2 hours. By the time I finally got a chance to take a bath and go to sleep, it was almost 4 a.m. I had to wake up soon to prepare my husband's lunchbox, so I decided to skip sleep altogether. Despite everything, my husband continued to try to teach me a lesson, especially when I kept visiting my younger sister. About a month and a half later, I received the heartbreaking news of my sister's passing. I wished it was a lie, I murmured, desperately hoping that my mother's announcement of my sister's passing was just a cruel joke. I had been warned countless times about my sister's critical condition, and I had even shared what I thought would be my last moments with her. I thought I was prepared, but my heart couldn't accept the reality. She was only 14 years old. I questioned whether my sister, who endured painful treatments and constant hospital stays, had truly found happiness in her life. As her older sister, had I been able to bring her joy? However, the last expression I saw on her face in the hospital was a smile. It seemed she hadn't suffered. You fought bravely and you did your best. Thank you for everything, I whispered through tears as I hugged my sister and bid her a final farewell. The funeral passed in a blur. and I realized I hadn't been home for several days. I informed my husband about my sister's passing, but as expected, he didn't bother to attend the funeral. Instead, he said something hurtful like, "You should prioritize me over the dead." Unable to bear such cruel words at such a time of grief, I ignored him and hung up the phone. When I finally returned home, weighed down by sorrow, my husband and mother-in-law were waiting for me at the door, looking stern and unwelcoming. "You're quite late, aren't you?" my husband remarked. "A family member has passed away. I couldn't just come back in a few hours. How can you accuse me of lying so easily?" I replied, feeling hurt and frustrated. "What? Are you going through a rebellious phase? Always lying and defying me. Whose wife do you think you are?" he retorted. "Wait a minute, my sister really did die. It's not a lie," I insisted. I wonder. Even though you haven't greeted me at the door in days, even if you're wearing a skirted suit now, it's hard to believe you," he replied dismissively. "Why is it hard to believe?" I asked, confused and upset. "If you truly love your husband, you should be able to do it. It's your duty as a wife to welcome your husband home." My husband scolded me, accusing me of being incompetent, "And don't even think about denying it. Are you having an affair?" "What? No matter how many times I tell you," he dressed provocatively, "and the other day you were flirting with my colleague. You're just interested in other men, aren't you? What a disgraceful woman," he continued, hurling hurtful accusations at me. "What the heck?" I started to argue back, fueled by anger and forgetting my fear of my husband. But then it happened. "Divorce, huh? Fine by me. Someone as frivolous as Kate isn't fit for Kevin, right?" my mother-in-law chimed in. My husband mumbled, trying to stop her, but I seized the opportunity. "I agree with Mom. Let's get a divorce," I declared firmly. My husband kept pleading with me to reconsider, but I had made up my mind. I couldn't risk staying with him any longer, afraid that his violence might escalate. This was my chance, and I was certain it was the right time to end our marriage. So I quickly packed my things and left the house. My husband kept insisting, "If you apologize, I'll forgive you." But I ignored him, thinking he must be delusional. He persisted until the end, grabbing my arm tightly and saying, "Wait." But I reacted instinctively, hitting him in the face with my bag and running away. I headed straight for a specific place, a room in an apartment that I had prepared just in case something like this happened. As soon as I entered the room, I received a call from my mother-in-law on my cell phone. "Hello. Kate, did you arrive safely?" she asked concernedly. "Yes, I'm fine. I'm in a taxi, so Kevin won't find out," I reassured her. "That's good. Make sure to hire a lawyer and proceed with the divorce quickly," she advised. "Yes, I can't wait to start living independently," I replied. In reality, my mother-in-law and I had been pretending to be at odds in front of my husband. It all began the day my husband brought a colleague home. After his lecture ended and my husband fell asleep, my mother-in-law approached me. "Leave this house. Get away from my son," she urged me. Each time my husband criticized me, my mother-in-law, who seemed to have her suspicions, would ask, "Really?" It turned out her late husband had been very much like my husband, and she had endured a lot in her own marriage. In her generation, divorce was frowned upon, so she couldn't end her own marriage. But it seems she wanted something better for me. Watching the interactions between my husband and me, she must have felt compelled to help me. That's when my mother-in-law, with the help of a friend, found a safe place for me to live alone. It's hard to believe she's related to my husband. I can't thank her enough for her kindness. After living in the apartment she arranged for me for 2 weeks, my mother-in-law finally visited, pulling along a suitcase. "Welcome. I'm looking forward to this new chapter," she greeted me warmly. Living with us, my mother-in-law discovered that her own son had changed. Before, he seemed like a good person, the image he presented to his colleagues. My mother-in-law blamed herself, believing that his behavior was influenced by his father's genes or things he witnessed during his childhood. For me, regardless of the reasons behind his behavior, I believe the real issue lies in his inability as an adult to control his emotions. So, I don't hold my mother-in-law responsible. My husband now takes good care of my mother-in-law, but only because he thinks she's on his side. I fear what he might do if he discovers she's been helping me with the divorce. That's why I suggested she come live with me for a while when she prepared this house. At first, she hesitated, worrying that once my husband and I divorce, she'd become a stranger to me. But I assured her, saying, "After everything you've done for me, there's no daughter-in-law distinction. You're like my mother or my sister. That's how I see you." On the way back from my sister's funeral, my mother-in-law steered the conversation toward divorce, intentionally supporting me. Recognizing her intentions, I quickly agreed to the divorce. I thought it would take more time and preparation to leave my husband, but thanks to my mother-in-law's help, that time came sooner than expected. I have nothing but gratitude for her. Finally, the divorce was officially settled through the lawyer. 4 days later, as I returned to the apartment, I was startled to find my ex-husband waiting for me outside. "I found you. You're trying to trick me," he accused loudly. Does he know about what happened? I wondered silently, trying to remain composed. "What do you want now?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "It's your fault that the credit card and bank account balances have decreased," he blamed me. "What are you talking about?" "I don't understand," I replied, feigning innocence. In truth, before the divorce, I was using my husband's credit card to gradually buy furniture for this house. I also quietly withdrew money from the bank account. It was all part of my plan, I confessed. When I discussed this with my mother-in-law, she encouraged me to go ahead with it, so I emptied the account without any hesitation. The reason why my unemployed mother-in-law and I can live comfortably, enjoying tea parties every night, is because of this money. That's my money. "You can't just do whatever you want without facing the consequences," he shouted angrily. "Remember the money we have? It's from the credit card we got after we got married and the money we saved together. Since we're married, it's both of ours," I explained, smiling at him. Suddenly, my mother-in-law returns from shopping and says, "Oh, you found out, didn't you?" Surprised, my ex-husband stands speechless behind me. "Hey, you're back," I greet my mother-in-law, trying to keep things normal. "What? Why is Mom here?" my husband asks, confused. "Well, because we're living together," I respond, with my husband still puzzled and my mother-in-law acting like it's no big deal. "So, you lied about going back to your parents' house, and why are you living with Kate, not me?" he questions. "I'm lost," Kevin admits. "Well, I've lost hope in you, Kevin," his mother replies. "What? But I'm the one who helped Kate get away," Kevin protests. "Actually, Kevin, Kate and I had already planned to split up before you even knew about it," his mother reveals. "But Mom, you were saying terrible things about Kate." "Yes, well, when I was criticizing her, I was really imagining you in her place," his mother confesses. "What do you mean?" Kevin asks, confused. "Because you're not the sharpest tool in the shed, and you get all worked up over silly things like a woman showing her collarbone. I was worried Kate would be in trouble. She deserved someone better than you for a husband," Kevin's mother bluntly tells him. Kevin is taken aback by his mother's harsh words. Meanwhile, I find her response so unexpectedly funny that I burst into laughter. "Mom, you do realize I'm your son, don't you?" Kevin asks, trying to make sense of it. "Unfortunately, yes." "I guess I should have raised you differently," his mother responds dryly. I can't help it, and my laughter grows even louder. "You're just a chit off the old block, like your dad. Watching you mistreat Kate reminded me of my own past. I worried that if she left you, you'd come crawling back to me. I couldn't take that chance, so I left you and moved in with Kate, for both our sakes," Kevin's mother explains. Kevin's mother's confession brings tears to his eyes. He finally explodes, "Is it my fault? Why? You're my child. You've been neglecting me." His mother laughs, almost incredulously. "Do I still need to mother a grown man who's almost 30, she scoffs. A few neighbors gathered as our argument escalated in the yard. They chuckled at my ex-husband's dramatic outburst, saying, "He's really making a scene." With people watching, he didn't dare lay a hand on us and retreated to his house. But the next day, he seemed to have completely lost it. He started spreading rumors about us to his friends and co-workers who used to hang out at our place. My ex may seem nice, but she ignores her husband, he complained to anyone who would listen. One woman at his office fired back, "You know, your behavior is exactly why women are wary of their husbands. It's becoming a societal problem." Although no one openly agreed, the vibe at work made it clear that Kevin was in the wrong, and he felt increasingly isolated. In the end, my ex-husband, who turned out to be quite sensitive, couldn't handle the judgmental stares and whispers anymore. He quickly quit his job. It's ironic how he was so quick to criticize me but couldn't handle criticism himself. How sad. Feeling alone, he sent me a lengthy letter trying to justify his behavior and boasting about his greatness as a man. The letter was a whopping 10 pages long. I was surprised when I received the thick envelope. I had blocked his texts, but if he could write this much by hand, I can only imagine how many texts he would have sent. His final line was, "If you ever miss me, feel free to contact me." So I playfully replied, "Then please go ahead with the property division." That sparked another big argument. I used to be afraid when we lived together, but not anymore. I stood my ground with my lawyer. Even before his mother suggested I leave, I had secretly been recording his behavior at home, preparing for a divorce. All those months enduring his hurtful words paid off. With the evidence, I successfully sorted out the property division. After that, I moved out from living with my ex-mother-in-law when I found a new job. It was still close enough for a reasonable commute. Surprisingly, she had found herself a boyfriend. It turned out the person who introduced us to the apartment was her new beau. She left with him, holding hands, and said, "Come visit us once we're settled." I must admit, my ex-mother-in-law really surprised me. She's a fantastic woman, and it's clear why she's so well liked, regardless of her age. As for me, I spent my best years focused on work after changing careers, thinking I might have missed my chance for remarriage. However, I started joining regular online gatherings with my colleagues. This gave me more opportunities to casually exchange contact info with people I didn't usually talk to, including a director from another department who showed interest in me. At first, I kept my distance because we worked for the same company. But as we began having private online chats about things we couldn't discuss at work, we grew closer and eventually started dating. The head of the department, who hadn't been in a relationship for years since his last girlfriend left him because of his workaholic tendencies, treated me with caution, saying, "I don't want to repeat the same mistake." And happily, we decided to tie the knot next year. I was concerned that his parents might not approve of me, considering I've been divorced before and he's getting married for the first time. However, I'm relieved to see his parents are accepting and even grateful, saying, "Thank you for being with our son." When I shared the news of my upcoming marriage with my ex-mother-in-law, she was genuinely happy for me. Oh, and about my ex-husband, it seems he found a job at a different bank and got remarried. But knowing his personality, it's likely he's been divorced again. That makes it 3 divorces now. He works at a bank and initially comes off as charming, but he tends to blame his ex-wives for the divorces, which makes it seem like women fall for him. Even when my ex-mother-in-law tries to warn women about his true nature at wedding receptions, he manages to manipulate them skillfully. Well, after 3 divorces, it's likely he'll start being avoided by women. I just hope there won't be any more victims. With the way he's going, he probably won't have a good ending because he's likely disliked by many women. But honestly, it's not my concern anymore. My name is Lisa. I'm 35 years old and I work part-time. I live with my husband Mark and our daughter Emma. Mark works in an office, and Emma goes to 1st grade. We bought an old house and we still owe money for it. When Emma started school, I got a part-time job to help pay for the house. Mark's older sister Nancy got married before us. She lives with her dad, Mark's dad, in their family home. Nancy thinks she should have the house because she got married first. She says she'll take care of their dad, so she should get the house. Nancy's mom had already passed away when she got married, so she didn't need to take care of her dad at the time. The house where Mark's parents live is really big, and I remember being surprised when I saw it before we got married. It had a fancy gate and a lot of land around it, which made me wonder if Mark's parents were rich. When Mark and I were dating, he didn't seem very wealthy, so seeing his parents' big house was a shock. Mark said his family used to be rich, but they lost money over the years. He joked that even though his grandparents' house was big, it was old and not very comfortable to live in. He said it was amazing that his parents' house with its big piece of land was still in a nice neighborhood. I understand why Nancy, Mark's sister, wants to keep the house for herself. She kicked Mark out of the house if she could live there. She probably wants to own the land and house herself. But I don't know if Nancy actually owns the house now. When Mark and I got married, he said that since Nancy would take care of their dad, I wouldn't have to. We planned to let Nancy inherit the house. That's why we bought our own house. It might make their dad feel better to be taken care of by his daughter instead of me if he ever gets sick and needs help. When we go to visit Mark's family for Christmas or summer holidays, Nancy doesn't treat her dad very well. Even during meals, it feels like he's not part of the family. If Mark or I try to sit with him, Nancy gets upset and says he prefers to eat alone. After meals, when I talk to my father-in-law in his room, he tells me he's not happy living there because Nancy causes problems. He says he always eats separately from Nancy's family and gets less food. But Nancy still takes a lot of money from him, even though he only has his pension. Nancy doesn't do his laundry or help with chores much. My father-in-law does most of the cleaning and gardening because Nancy ignores him. Even her husband and kids don't treat him well. When my father-in-law asked Nancy's husband for a ride to the horse racetrack, he got yelled at. Nancy's son, who's 10, is rude to my father-in-law, saying he smells and should stay in his room. It seems like my father-in-law doesn't remember ever holding his grandson, even though they've lived together since he was born. When my daughter visits, my father-in-law loves spending time with her. He tells her she's his only grandchild, sounding a bit lonely. Hearing this makes me feel sorry for him. Whenever we go to his house, my husband gets upset and tells Nancy to treat their dad better. But Nancy gets angry with my husband, accusing him of trying to take the house away from her. I won't let anyone take this house, my husband insists. It's worrying how much Nancy cares about the house. Then, my father-in-law had a fall at home. The house isn't set up for elderly people, and he tripped over a small step, breaking his right hand. Luckily, he didn't have any other injuries and didn't need to go to the hospital, but it's hard for him to do anything without his right hand. When we visited him, we were shocked to see how weak he'd become. Not only can he not use his right hand, but he can hardly move his feet and clearly needs help. But Nancy's family completely ignores him and doesn't take care of him. He can still manage to get to the bathroom by himself, but eating is really hard for him. My husband confronted my sister-in-law right away. "Why aren't you looking after Dad?" But she didn't seem to understand why he was upset and just laughed it off. A broken hand is no big deal. He can walk by himself, and he's not complaining. It seemed like my father-in-law, used to being ignored, couldn't stand up to my sister-in-law, and she probably knew it. My husband was even more angry. "Isn't it obvious we should take care of our parents?" When he said that, my sister-in-law smirked and said, "You can take care of Dad. I don't want an old man with hardly any money." I was furious at how my sister-in-law could talk about her own father like that. She even said, taking care of a father who only gets a small pension isn't worth it. Her words were so mean that I lost my temper and spoke up. "Fine, we'll take care of him. He won't heal properly if he stays here." My husband agreed, and we decided to take my father-in-law and leave his house right away. While we were packing up my father-in-law's things, my sister-in-law started saying we couldn't have the house just because we were taking care of Dad. She cared more about the house than her own father and didn't have much else to say. My husband brushed off her comments, saying, "Don't worry, I already bought a house. I don't need this one. Do whatever you want with it." My sister-in-law seemed relieved to hear that. Even as we were getting ready for my father-in-law to move, my sister-in-law and her husband didn't help. Instead, they were mostly interested in checking if there were any valuable items among his belongings. They were probably relying on his pension, but with him leaving, that would stop. They hoped to find something valuable they could sell for cash, but they didn't find anything valuable. When my father-in-law left his house, my sister-in-law and her family didn't bother to say goodbye. They were very cold-hearted. When my father-in-law arrived at our house, he seemed much happier as he played with my daughter. He was like a different person compared to when he was living at his old house. We let him stay in a room that we weren't using, but because the move happened suddenly, we couldn't make any preparations. If we had known earlier, we could have done some renovations, like installing handrails and removing steps. I said to my father-in-law, feeling sorry that we weren't fully prepared, "I'll install the handrails later." To my surprise, my father-in-law also apologized. "I'm sorry for making you worry. I wonder if $200 million will be enough to take care of me and my horses." I couldn't help but laugh. Was my father-in-law making jokes now? He seemed much happier since moving in with us. "Horses?" I chuckled, knowing it was unlikely. "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but taking care of you will probably cost more." I couldn't understand why my father-in-law brought up horses, but his joke seemed way over the top, like something a wealthy person might say. But when I saw his worried face after my response, I started to worry too. He asked, "Does taking care of a person really cost that much? All I have left is $200 million. Looking at his serious expression, I realized he wasn't joking earlier. I panicked and tried to explain that my previous comment was just a joke. $200 million is more than enough. It's actually too much. I rushed to my husband to ask about the horses and the $200 million. He was just as confused, but then he remembered something about his grandfather being a landowner. Remember how I told you my granddad was wealthy? Maybe Dad used to own horses. My husband and I decided to talk to my father-in-law to get the full story. It turned out that he had been owning horses for years, and his trips to the racetrack were actually to check on his own horses, not to bet. He had kept this a secret from his family, so my husband and his sister had no clue about it. Now, with his broken hand and thinking about his future, he worried that if he mentioned owning horses and having $200 million in assets, his daughter and son-in-law might demand it all. He got concerned when I mentioned making home modifications, thinking it might trigger their demands. That's why he decided to tell me about his horse ownership and finances. Understanding the situation, my husband reassured his father, saying, "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses. If you've got $200 million, you should be okay. We'll handle your caregiving expenses, so don't worry about it." His confident words reassured me too. After checking with the person who had always looked after the horses, we made sure there wouldn't be any issues, and we'd put the horse matter to rest. Now that I knew my father-in-law was quite wealthy, I started to see him in a different way. I couldn't help but think that his daughter, who had kicked him out despite his wealth, would regret it once she found out the truth. The idea of her regret brought me some satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in with us, our lives had changed. It was busy juggling my part-time job and taking care of him, but my husband helped, and we managed. Having my father-in-law at home brought a new companion for my daughter, and he seemed happier too. His walking had improved since he moved in, and even though we hadn't finished the home modifications yet, he could walk slowly with a cane. Although his broken hand hadn't healed yet, he was practicing eating with his left hand. In his old home, my father-in-law didn't move around much because his nephew would complain whenever he left his room. Even when he tried to go to the racetrack, his son-in-law would seem annoyed. This lack of activity might have contributed to his muscles weakening and his fall. On sunny days, he enjoyed going for walks with my daughter. I had been so focused on my father-in-law's recovery that I hadn't thought much about my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after my father-in-law moved in with us, my sister-in-law called in a panic. "Is Dad there? If he is, get him on the phone right away." But at that moment, my father-in-law was out for a walk with my husband and daughter. When I told her that, she got even angrier. "You knew, didn't you? You knew that house was rented. That's why you took Dad to cause problems for us." I was confused by what she said. She seemed to be suggesting that their house was rented, but she had always boasted that it was theirs. While it might still be in my father-in-law's name, calling it a rented house didn't add up. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law became even more upset. Some man claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up, saying I'm behind on rent and that I need to either pay up or leave. I was even more confused when she mentioned the landlord of the in-laws' home. Shouldn't it be my father-in-law? Did he go to collect rent for my sister-in-law? Just then, my father-in-law returned, so I quickly explained the situation and had him answer my sister-in-law's call. With a hint of anger in his voice, my father-in-law spoke to the daughter who had driven him out of his own home. "Weren't you told that the house was rented? That house belongs to the company where my father was the CEO. I've been paying the rent until you kicked me out." My father-in-law sounded distant, and my sister-in-law, sensing his anger, shouted from the phone, "I haven't heard anything about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me." About 30 minutes later, my sister-in-law and her husband arrived, looking flushed and surprised to see my father-in-law walking on his own. But there were bigger issues to address as my sister-in-law erupted once more. "I thought the land and house belonged to you, Dad. Did you deceive me?" My sister-in-law's husband asked. "All that aside, can you please pay the rent? If you don't, we'll be kicked out of the house." My father-in-law laughed it off. "Why should I pay rent for a house where I'm not living? After you guys kicked me out, don't you think that's a bit too much to ask?" Unable to respond to my father-in-law's reasonable statement, my brother-in-law fell silent. This time, my sister-in-law began to speak. "Dad, were you planning to make us struggle from the beginning? You seem far more energetic than when you were living with us, even though you pretended to be injured." To address my sister-in-law's strange accusation, I intervened. "That's because he's been doing rehabilitation exercises every day, working on walking, and practicing using his injured hand for eating." My father-in-law chimed in, reinforcing my words. "I actually think being kicked out by you guys was a blessing. Since I came to live with Mark, we all eat together, and I'm never made to feel like a nuisance." Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law and her husband fell silent, their jaws clenching shut. Then, right on cue, my daughter came and unwittingly revealed my father-in-law's true status. "Grandpa, your horse is going to race in the next horse race, right?" My father-in-law grinned and replied, "Yes, it'll be in this Sunday's race. Why don't we go watch it together?" My daughter happily dashed off, but my sister-in-law and her husband seemed to grasp the significance of this. They hastily asked my father-in-law, "Dad, do you own a horse? Are you a horse owner?" My father-in-law replied, a smug look on his face, "I stayed silent because I knew if I mentioned money, you try to take it. And I know talking about horse racing always makes your husband frown." With that, my father-in-law's previously cheerful demeanor turned serious. His intimidating expression sent shivers down my spine. And as he began to speak slowly, the tension in the room intensified. "I no longer consider someone like you, who disrespects your own father, as my daughter. I knew you only moved in with me for the inheritance." Caught off guard by my father-in-law's stern words, my sister-in-law was visibly stunned. With the final blow, my father-in-law declared, "You won't get a single cent of my inheritance." Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law appeared shocked and stumbled backward. Her husband, who had been trying to support her, looked defeated and left the room. The rent for my father-in-law's house was a hefty sum, and it was impossible for my sister-in-law and her husband to afford it. So inevitably, they had to move out. I had no idea that my parents-in-law's house was rented, and my husband didn't know either. He later confirmed it with his father. After moving out, my sister-in-law, who had been spending money recklessly without worrying about rent, suddenly found herself in a financial crisis. Their spending habits were hard to break, and they started relying on credit cards to make ends meet, which only resulted in mounting debt. I heard that my sister-in-law and her husband, unable to rely on my father-in-law anymore, moved to her husband's parents' house. But I'm not sure what happened after that. Meanwhile, things have been going well for us since we started living with my father-in-law. My father-in-law, who had previously broken his hand, healed well, and his legs and hips became stronger to the point where he could do everything on his own. He's now so energetic that he goes jogging with my daughter. He's like a completely different person from when we first moved in. Since that incident, my father-in-law has been having discussions with my husband and thinking about the future, even drafting a will. I'm not sure what's in the will, but I assume he's arranged things so that his daughter won't inherit anything. What made me happiest was when my father-in-law paid off the remaining balance of our home loan. We still had nearly 20 years of payments left, but I'm grateful that he paid it off ahead of schedule. With the loan fully paid, my father-in-law is considering doing some renovations to our home to make it more accessible. He talks about his plans with a smile, but I don't want him to talk about becoming bedridden. I want him to stay healthy for as long as possible.
Sil kept making mean comments about my husband because he chose to stay home and take care of our family instead of working. I got really upset and told everyone at her wedding dinner how Jason had supported their whole family during tough times. Let me give you some background. I'm 28 years old and my husband Jason is 29. We met 6 years ago and got married 3 years ago. We have a 1-year-old daughter together. I met Jason through my brother, who is friends with him because of their jobs. Jason used to be a police officer, and my brother owns a pizza place where Jason used to hang out. One year, my brother brought Jason home for Thanksgiving, and that's when we met. After dating for 3 years, Jason proposed, and we got married. I had met most of Jason's family before we got married, and they were usually nice to me, except for my sister-in-law Janice, who is 27. Even though Jason assured me that Janice would warm up to me eventually, she never did. She never openly showed her dislike for me in front of others. Instead, She would make subtle insults and backhanded compliments, passing them off as jokes. At first, it really bothered me, but after a while, I got used to it. I got used to ignoring Syl's mean comments because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. She never said anything rude when my husband Jason was around, probably because she didn't want to upset him. Jason knew about the tension between his sister and me and made sure I wasn't alone with her during family visits. I didn't want Jason to cut off his family because of Syl's behavior, so we just pretended everything was fine. We both tried to ignore Syl's comments, even though it wasn't easy. We didn't really have any other choice. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up instead of staying silent. I was worried about causing trouble or being seen as overly sensitive. But I couldn't stay quiet any longer, especially after what happened recently. Jason used to be a police officer, but he quit his job to be a stay-at-home dad a few months ago. I'm a working mom with a demanding job as a trauma surgeon. My husband and I were struggling to balance our careers with raising our daughter. Both of us had demanding jobs and couldn't spend much time at home. We relied on daycare and our parents to take care of our daughter when needed, but it didn't feel like enough. We felt like we were missing out on important time with her, and we worried she wouldn't have us around much as she grew up. About a year ago, my husband Jason and I had a serious talk about this. He decided to quit his job as a police officer so he could spend more time at home with our daughter. I didn't push him to make that choice, but he felt it was the right thing to do since I earned more money, and he believed it was fair for our daughter to have one of us around most of the time. I asked Jason countless times if he was sure about quitting his job to become a full-time dad. It was a big decision, and I wanted to be sure he wouldn't regret it or feel resentful toward me. But he reassured me that he was happy to take on this role. Even though he loved being a cop, he seemed genuinely content spending his days taking care of our daughter and managing the household. We talked about it recently, and he admitted that it was a bit challenging at first to adjust to being a stay-at-home dad after working for so long. But over time, he found it easier, especially because he could spend quality time with our daughter. He's really happy with how things have turned out. He used to dream of being a cop, but now his biggest dream is being a father, and I think that's pretty amazing. However, Jason's family doesn't see any beauty in our situation. I probably should have expected this, considering they're pretty traditional. While they allow women to work, there's a catch. They don't allow men to work at home. None of the men in Jason's family do household chores because they think it's beneath them. So the women end up doing both their jobs and the household work, or they're pressured to quit their jobs altogether, like my mother-in-law did. What's even crazier is that they don't see anything wrong with this setup. They think it's perfectly fine. Jason and I have talked about this, and we both agree it's a backward way of thinking. But we've never brought it up with his family because they just come up with excuses to justify their beliefs, and we didn't want to get into arguments with them. If they're happy living their lives that way, who are we to judge them? Thankfully, we found a different path for ourselves. Jason and I have always divided our responsibilities equally, and sometimes he even does more household chores if I have to work late. Now, with him staying at home full-time, he's taking care of everything at home while I focus on my job to support us. We believe that as long as we're all happy and healthy and there's food on the table, it doesn't matter who does what. However, his parents and sister strongly disagree with this. They're upset with Jason for quitting his job and staying home with our daughter. They think it makes him less of a man or something, and they've been arguing with him about it for months. I tried to step in at first, but his parents made it clear that my involvement would only make things worse. Jason didn't want me to defend him either because he didn't want to drag me into the conflict. So I decided to stay out of their way. It took them a while, but eventually they accepted our new arrangement and stopped bringing it up. It probably helped that they had other things to focus on, like Janice getting engaged. Her boyfriend, Harry, proposed after they'd been together for 2 years. Everyone was so caught up in the excitement of the engagement that they pretty much forgot about Jason's situation for a while. We were grateful for the distraction because it meant we didn't have to deal with any arguments from his family about Jason staying home. It seemed like everything had blown over, and we wouldn't have to hear about traditional gender roles again. But then, at Janice's rehearsal dinner yesterday, the topic came up again. So we had a bit of a crisis. Janice's wedding was just a day away, and we needed to figure out how to handle the situation quickly. We needed help urgently, so we posted about it hoping for a fast response. During dinner at the rehearsal dinner, Jason and I were sitting across from Janice and her fiancé Harry. Their parents and a few other family members were there too, and we were all chatting happily. Everything seemed fine, and I was relieved that we were getting along well, especially after the tension from Jason quitting his job. But then Janice suddenly changed the subject and asked me about my work. I felt really uncomfortable, but I had to answer Janice's question about my work because it seemed innocent enough. I just said everything was going well and hoped she'd leave it at that. But then she turned to Jason and made a joke about how he's now living a life of leisure since he's not working and relying on my income. She didn't stop there. She kept making jokes about how he's not in charge anymore and cracked some other mean jokes about him. Jason tried to brush it off and smile, but it was clear he was hurt. I couldn't take it anymore. It was like all the frustration from dealing with Janice and her family's outdated views just boiled over. So I decided to bring up something that nobody wanted to hear. I couldn't hold back anymore, so I told Janice that she could joke all she wanted, but Jason was still a better person than anyone in their family. I pointed out how audacious it was for her to make fun of Jason, considering that without him, she wouldn't have been able to go to college or even meet Harry. Jason had been helping his parents financially since he was 18. It was a dark time for their family when Jason's father lost his job while Jason was still in high school. Janice was too sheltered to notice the struggles in her own family, and her parents and Jason made sure to shield her from it. They never said no to her, even when they were struggling themselves. Jason had to work 2 jobs to support them while his father searched for work. Thankfully, they only had to endure this hardship for about a year. Thanks to Jason's support and some savings, Janice never knew about any of this until I brought it up at the rehearsal dinner. She was shocked, and so was everyone else, because the secret had been kept for almost a decade. Nobody was supposed to talk about it because they didn't want Janice to find out. But after all those years, I finally brought it up, and now she knew exactly how much she owed to her brother. She had no right to make fun of him or put him down. Everyone else might have kept quiet to protect her, especially Jason, but I couldn't stand by silently. After I spoke up, there was just silence at the table. After a moment, Jason and I left, and we walked back to our hotel room without saying a word. Even when we got there, we didn't discuss what had happened at dinner. I knew it would become a big deal, and so did Jason. But his silence told me he didn't think I did anything wrong, so there was no need to talk about it further. The next morning, when I woke up to the sound of knocking on our door, and it was Jason's parents. They wanted to talk to me right away. After they came in and we all sat down, they got straight to the point. They told me that the family wanted me to apologize to Janice. They felt that what I said at dinner was something they had kept from her for a long time, and it wasn't right for me to bring it up. They said it wasn't my place to say those things to her, and it had ruined the atmosphere of the evening. They also mentioned that Janice was just joking around with Jason like siblings often do, and now she was upset and couldn't stop crying, and it was all because of me. I realized I had no justification for getting so defensive and revealing such a big secret, knowing the impact it would have on their family. Janice was feeling incredibly guilty and kept apologizing to her parents, realizing she had been a burden on them without even realizing it. Her parents explained that she was having a total breakdown, which is exactly why they never wanted her to know the truth about their past struggles. They believed she was emotionally fragile and wouldn't be able to handle it, and her reactions seemed to confirm their fears. Now they want me to apologize to Janice and the rest of the family for my outburst and tell her I didn't mean what I said. I have until the end of the day to decide, but they want me to resolve things before her wedding tomorrow. There's a 1-day gap between the rehearsal dinner and the wedding, so she has time for her friends to arrive. It's fortunate that I have until the evening to decide what to do. Jason believes I shouldn't apologize because I was just standing up for him. And Janice has always been rude to me, so it's time I stood my ground. I've been leaning towards the same viewpoint. However, with Janice's wedding coming up tomorrow, I don't feel good about potentially causing her to have a breakdown right before her big day. Most of her family members think I owe her an apology, but I know their opinion is biased. Even Jason's opinion might be influenced by our situation. So I've turned to Reddit for a neutral perspective. I brought up how my husband helped his family in the past because Janice kept making fun of him for being a stay-at-home father. Update 1. It's evening now, and I've read the comments. I've decided I don't need to apologize for anything. Jason and I are packing up to leave because it would be awkward if I don't apologize and still go to Janice's wedding tomorrow. We're going to tell his parents we're leaving, because it wouldn't be right to just disappear without saying anything. Jason and I discussed this earlier, and he thinks it's the right thing to do. Janice has always been rude and insensitive, and it's time she faces the consequences. Jason's family has been difficult to deal with since he quit his job. He expected them to support him, but they haven't. They make him feel bad for wanting to spend time with his daughter. We knew that they had old-fashioned views about work and household chores, but we hoped they would change. Since they haven't, it's their fault if we stop talking to them. We're happy with our lives, and if they can't be happy for us, we don't want them around. They've been negative and critical of us for months, and we don't need that kind of energy in our lives. So we stood up for ourselves because we had enough. Jason's parents didn't like it and called us selfish, saying we needed to consider how our actions would affect Janice's wedding. They thought our absence would cause a scene and take the attention away from her. Janice herself showed up after hearing the argument. She said it was okay if we didn't come to the wedding, and actually preferred it that way. But then she accused me of being selfish and trying to ruin her wedding. We ended up arguing, which wasn't great, but it gave us a reason to leave without more drama. They didn't try to stop us, which was a relief. We just want to focus on our own lives now. We might forgive them if they apologize, but that seems unlikely. Right now, we're just happy to be home with our daughter. Jason's playing with her while I write this. Our family feels perfect, no matter what anyone else thinks. Hey everyone, this update is a day after the wedding, which we didn't attend. Apparently, there was a lot of talk about us, mainly from Janice herself. It's funny because her parents were worried our absence would make the day about us. But Janice made it about us anyway. She told distant relatives about our argument, making a big deal out of it. Some people are reaching out to Jason for details, wanting to be part of the drama. We're staying out of it and being vague in our responses. We don't want to stoop to their level and get into more fights. Janice loves drama, and we don't want to give her more. We're ignoring everyone and trying to take the high road, even though they talked about us behind our backs. We just want to move on and leave the drama behind.
I really thought Mom had a lot of money saved up. I mentioned it before, right? It's time to kick her out. Why keep a jobless person here? I've been living here for 3 months, and my son and his wife used up all my savings. They treated me badly. I had enough, so I left quietly. Then, my son called me. Mom, what's happening? Tony sounded worried on the phone. Around that time, something I did became big news across the United States. I'm Sarah, and I'm 70 years old. I lived in France for a while, but I got sick, so I came back to the States. My old apartment was gone, so I asked my son and his wife if I could stay with them for a bit. Tony, my only son, is 44 and works in an office. He and his wife, Alice, don't have kids, and they live quietly. We lost touch while I was away, but I decided to reconnect, and Tony seemed happy to hear from me. I explained my situation and asked if I could stay for a while. Tony agreed, though he seemed unsure. It felt awkward to rely on them. But the happiness of being with family again outweighed my doubts. With a mix of nerves and happiness, I took a taxi from the airport to their house. When I got there, Tony and Alice greeted me at the door. Tony seemed glad to see me, but Alice looked upset. I plan to stay here for a few months. My stuff will arrive later. I said, leaving my carry-on bag and heading to the living room. We talked about our lives, jobs, and my time in France. When Tony asked why I moved there, I just said, I wanted to enjoy the French countryside as I get older. Tony laughed, but Alice stayed unhappy. We also talked about my health issues. I've been dizzy a lot, and might have Meniere's disease. Sometimes I can't stand and feel sick when it happens. I don't feel safe living alone, so I want to stay with them until I feel better. After our chat, I went to get my stuff for my carry-on. As I organized it in the hallway, I heard Tony and Alice talking. Are you serious about letting Sarah stay? I don't want to live with an old woman. She's my mom, Alice said. You're not always home because you work part-time, Tony replied. But what about when we're off work? How long is she staying? I want her gone. Alice insisted. Mom will leave eventually. Let's talk about money tomorrow. Just keep it down, she might hear you, Tony warned. She can't hear us, she's old. Old age brings sharp ears for insults, Alice said. There I was hearing their conversation in the hallway. I felt bad for suddenly staying with Tony and his wife. It must be hard for them, but I'm happy to spend time with them after so long. When Tony was young, I raised him alone after my husband died. We didn't have much, and Tony faced difficulties with his health. This doesn't make up for that, but I came here to apologize and show gratitude. It's a shame I'm not welcome, but they have their own lives. I went to the guest room they gave me, trying to calm my anxious heart. The next morning, Tony went to work, leaving just Alice and me at home. While I was doing some crafting in the living room, Alice came up to me. Hey Sarah, can you clean up this mess? I looked around and saw fabric scraps and threads scattered about. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll clean it up. Do you want to see what I'm making? I showed her the small pouch I was sewing, with a little green turtle design. It's a turtle pouch. I love turtles, so I make crafts with turtle themes. It even has a zipper on its shell, I explained. That's nice, Sarah, but you can't stay here all day. Find somewhere else to go when I'm not working. You're in the way, Alice said, cutting me off, clearly uninterested. But I get dizzy if I go outside too much, I protested. I'll drive you to the nearby community center to stay during the day. I have things to do at home, Alice said firmly, without room for discussion. She added, and while you're here, help with the chores. You're not just here to relax. Since we're letting you stay, do some cleaning and laundry instead of crafting. Stunned, I finally replied, okay, and slowly got up from the armchair. Despite feeling dizzy and sore, I ended up doing all the housework. Alice and Tony treated me like a housekeeper, and it seemed like Alice hadn't been keeping up with chores before I arrived. That night, when Tony got home, he asked, Mom, did you bring your banking card? He spoke with a smile. I don't mind you living with us, but life costs money. Could you chip in? I looked at Tony, nodded, and stood up. I took out my banking card from my handmade pouch and handed it to him. He checked it quickly, and his face tightened. Wait, Mom, is this all you have saved? Any other accounts? I replied. That's all I have. I don't need much at my age. No chronic illnesses or anything. I smiled as the conversation continued, but Tony's expression darkened. This isn't enough money, not even $10,000. You said you were living well abroad, so I assumed. Tony kept pressing me, asking if I had more money. When I said no, he sighed and slumped his shoulders. Okay, I'll hold on to this cash for now. I'm doing you a favor by letting you live here, so this is the least you could do. After getting my account password, Tony took my bank and debit cards and left the room. That night, lying in bed, I could hear Tony muttering through the wall that separated our rooms. This is disappointing. I thought Mom was wealthy. Our household is actually struggling financially. We shouldn't have let her stay. We gain nothing from having her here. They sounded confident, talking openly in the next room. Maybe they wanted me to hear them. In my cold bed, I fought back tears of loneliness and sadness. The next day, since Alice had a day off, she drove me to the local community center. When I opened my bag to continue my crafting, I realized I forgot the fabric I needed at home. I hesitated to ask Alice to go back and get it. Luckily, my dizziness wasn't too bad that day, so I decided to walk home to fetch it since I knew the area well. As I approached the house, I glanced through the window and saw Alice with a man I didn't recognize. They seemed very close, and I hesitated outside for a moment before deciding not to interrupt them. It dawned on me that maybe they wanted me out so I wouldn't interfere with whatever was going on between them. Back at the community center, thoughts of Alice and the man kept swirling in my mind. So I decided to call someone for advice. From then on, I avoided bringing up the situation and continued interacting with Tony and his wife as usual. However, whenever I left the house, I made sure to leave a red turtle pouch conspicuously on the living room side table. 3 months had gone by since I moved in with Tony's family. By then, I had essentially become the household's maid. When I was home, I had to do endless chores, and when Alice was around, I was sent off to the community center. Most of my savings had been drained by Tony, who had a gambling addiction. He spent most of his free time on lotteries and slots, likely stemming from financial hardships he faced as a child. At first, I tried to talk to him about it, but it always ended in anger. After enduring 3 months of hardship, I reached my breaking point. One night before a long weekend, I decided to address something I've been pondering. Tony, Alice, I want to thank you for letting me stay with you. Tony, I know I caused difficulties for you when you were young due to our financial situation. I apologize for any trouble I caused, but I'm grateful. I presented a homemade turtle pouch from the table. It was green with a zipper on the shell. This is a token of my appreciation to both of you. I hope you'll accept it. To my surprise, neither Tony nor Alice showed any interest in my handmade gift. Mom, enough of that. Can't we access some funds from your French account or something? Tony suggested. I already told you, there's no more money. Look, I put a lot of effort into making this. Can't you accept it as a gesture of love? Remember how happy you used to be when I filled the shell with candy and a bit of pocket money? Tony's irritation grew. I'm not a child anymore. I don't find joy in receiving something like this, Sarah. How much longer do you plan to depend on us? Frankly, it's irritating. Tony and his wife exchanged a cold look, appearing desperate. I asked Tony, do you remember Joe? He helped us out in that old apartment we lived in. What? I don't remember. Stop bringing up old stories, Tony replied sharply. A heavy silence settled between us as I held onto the turtle pouch tightly, feeling the paper inside. The next day, Tony and his wife went on vacation, leaving me behind. After our conversation the previous night, I had already planned to leave the house. I quickly packed my bags with the arranged carrier and sent them off to my home in France. I made sure to include the red turtle pouch in my carry-on bag. Leaving a brief note of gratitude and farewell on the table, I walked out of the house where I had stayed for 3 months. After leaving the house, I didn't immediately return home. Instead, I stayed in a hotel in the US for a while. I had matters to attend to, and I figured Tony and his wife would reach out to me eventually. True to my expectations, about 2 weeks later, Tony called. Mom, what's the deal with the turtle pouch? It's yours, right? Tony's voice sounded frantic over the phone. Oh, you noticed? I replied calmly. I wasn't surprised when I saw the news on TV about the turtle-shaped pouch. Inside it was a check for $1 million. It was my way of expressing gratitude for all they'd done and apologizing for any trouble I caused them when Tony was young. Some might think it shallow to make amends with money. But I had dreamed of this day for over 40 years, saving up bit by bit. Before meeting Tony after so long, I did some research and discovered he was in debt. He had tried to clear his gambling debts by gambling more, only to sink deeper. Despite having a steady job, he couldn't break free from the cycle. I simply wanted him to pay off his debts and find peace. However, they refused my gesture, forgetting the kindness they had once shown my family. So I decided to split the $1 million check into smaller amounts and donate it to charities and welfare organizations across America. I placed the donations in the handmade turtle pouch and sent them anonymously. The turtle pouch became a sensation, making headlines and trending on social media. Alice, isn't that the turtle pouch? Someone commented online. Yeah, looks like it, another remarked. Yes, that's the one. I was planning to give them filled with money too, I replied. I see. Well, he could have just told us. We would have accepted it. If you didn't want my feelings, then you don't need my money either. Tony's voice was angry over the phone. It's my money. How dare you deceive me? Give it back, he demanded. I couldn't bear to listen to Tony's anger any longer, so I pulled the phone away from my ear. After a moment, I spoke. All right, calm down. You're giving me a headache. There's one more turtle. And if you really want it, it's yours. Tony eventually settled down and insisted on having the turtle. We agreed to meet later at a cafe. On the appointed day, I brought the last red turtle in an envelope to our meeting spot. Tony and his wife were already there, demanding the money before I even sat down. When I silently pulled out the red turtle, Tony snatched it immediately, unzipping its shell. But instead of finding a check, he found a small electronic device. What the heck is this? Tony was confused. He found a tiny button and pressed it. A voice started playing, and Alice, standing next to Tony, turned pale. Seated next to Tony, Alice's expression changed as she heard a voice recording. It was her own, speaking warmly with another man who wasn't Tony. What is this? Why? What's happening? Alice seemed to finally understand that it was a recording of her having an affair at home. She tried to grab the recorder from Tony's hand, but he held on tight. While they struggled, I opened the envelope. I brought out several pictures and laid them on the table, showing Alice cheating with another man at home. Faced with undeniable evidence, Alice was flustered and kept asking, why? Why? Tony picked up the photos one by one, studying them closely. Something didn't feel right since I arrived at your house. A friend suggested I hire someone to find out, and even offered to cover the costs. Why would you do this? What's wrong with you? Alice's voice trembled. Well, you're my son's wife. It's heartbreaking to think family would deceive each other. Maybe you'll understand when you're older. Fate brought me here to uncover your infidelity, Alice. Have you been lying to me this whole time? Tony's disappointment was evident in his voice. Tony, when did this start? You have secrets too. If you're saying she cheated, you need to admit your mistakes, Alice argued. I never cheated, but what about the money you owe? Tony went quiet, and Alice took her turn to speak. What about you spending all your money on gambling? I only use the money I earn, and you have a part-time job, so you should have some savings, Alice replied. As I listened to their argument, it was obvious this couple had been holding on somehow until now. Both of you are broke. Tony, you owe $40,000. Alice, you've been giving all your earnings to your other person. I had someone check your finances too, I interrupted. Both Tony and Alice were really surprised, and they started yelling at each other. I was stunned when I found out about the investigation results. This couple was really close to running out of money. Listen, if we get Mom's money, we can pay off the debt. So just give it to us already, Tony insisted. I already gave away all the money. The only thing left is this red turtle statue, I clarified. He spent all my savings on gambling, remember? Tony accused Alice. What? No way. All of it? Alice's eyes widened in shock. In a fit of anger, Tony lunged at me across the table. Other people in the cafe started paying attention, and the staff rushed over. The $1 million was supposed to be mine. It's mine. Give it back, Tony shouted. Soon, the police had to be called to calm Tony down. After they talked to him, they kindly escorted me back to my hotel because I was worried about Tony's aggressive behavior. A week later, Tony and Alice's relationship had fallen apart completely because of the affair and money problems. They got divorced. Tony, now single, got even more caught up in gambling and debt. He was caught trying to steal money from his job and was fired. To make things worse, his angry outburst in the cafe was recorded and shared on social media, making it hard for him to find another job. Unable to face the embarrassment, Tony cut off all contact and disappeared. After the divorce, Alice didn't have anyone to depend on, so she moved into an old public housing unit and lived alone. Just as I was about to make a donation to help rescue turtles, a post I made online joking about my own turtle went viral. Alice started experiencing harassment and stalking because of it, which eventually spread to her part-time job and got her fired. Even the man she was having an affair with got tired of her and left. Now she doesn't have any income and is relying on temporary assistance for needy families. After that, I went back to my home in France. Once I finished unpacking in my apartment, I changed into a dress smoothly. While I was going over some work documents, I heard a noise at the door. It seemed Joe, my roommate, had come back home. Hey, Madam President. Welcome back. How was your trip to America? Joe greeted me with a smile as he hung up his coat and put down his bags. Hey Joe, I'm back, and look. I brought back so many souvenirs, I said excitedly. Wow, all my favorites. Thanks. I'll bring some to the storytelling event at the community center tomorrow, Joe said happily. Joe carefully examined each souvenir on the table, his face glowing with delight. After we both got back on our feet, Joe and his wife moved away for work. Years later, we unexpectedly met in the city, and I started helping with a support program for people in need that Joe had started. By then, Joe's wife had passed away, and we began working together as partners in both business and life. I've been leading the organization since Joe retired a few years ago. What began as a small initiative by Joe and his late wife has grown into a large international organization over the past 30 years. Currently, our focus is on helping single moms raise their children. A few years ago, we moved to France to study their advanced support systems. While we've become well known in France, we're still not widely recognized in America. I plan to expand our activities there soon and wanted to spend some time with Tony and his family just as a mother before they found out about my work. In the end, I couldn't get them to understand how I felt. But that's their decision. Even though it was brief, I was happy to spend time together as a family. Now at 70 years old, I believe age is just a number. There's still so much I want and need to accomplish. I straightened my back in my dress and began pondering my upcoming international speech for tomorrow.
My upbringing took a sharp turn from the very beginning, as my parents, facing financial constraints and harboring disappointment over my gender, decided to put me up for adoption when I was just a child. Growing up in a modest household with two older sisters, life was far from idyllic. We resided in a quaint ancestral home in a small town, relying on the support of my grandparents' farm for a significant portion of our sustenance. My father, a truck driver, was often away, returning home every few days, while my mother worked as a waitress. Being the unplanned third child, I discovered the unwelcome circumstances of my arrival as I matured. My parents had initially contemplated getting rid of me, but medical concerns dissuaded them. Moreover, my mother's desire for another daughter led to disappointment when I, a boy, arrived. Growing up, my small-town existence became colored by the embarrassment of being dressed in my sister's discarded clothes, a consequence of my mother's practicality in reusing outfits. School became a challenging environment where I faced ridicule for wearing a girl's uniform and sporting long hair. Complaints only resulted in punishment from my mother. As I navigated childhood, I absorbed a constant stream of abuse and harsh words from my parents. My father's sporadic presence offered little solace, as he fluctuated between a neutral stance and moments of cruelty akin to my mother. My resentment grew as I realized my sisters consistently received the best while I got their leftovers. Rebellion became my coping mechanism, a response to the injustices I perceived. I wasn't a saintly child. I directed my frustration towards my parents, holding them responsible for my misery. Grounded and left to fend for myself, I faced the struggles of a 6-year-old grappling with an unjust reality. A pivotal moment occurred when severe bullying in the playground pushed me to the brink. Upon discovering my sister's new holiday clothes, I succumbed to a fit of frustration, cutting them into confetti. While I regret my actions, they stemmed from a place of pain rather than malice. Instead of understanding my turmoil, my parents deemed it a sin deserving the harshest punishment. They decided to put me up for adoption. Despite waiting for a month, no one stepped forward to take me in. The frustration that followed was directed at me, reinforcing the narrative of my perceived worthlessness. In the midst of it all, I overheard my mother expressing how unwanted I was, further deepening the wounds of rejection. I often find myself pondering the wish that I had undergone a gender check, a step that might have spared me from being brought into a world where my parents harbored such intense hatred for me. It's disheartening to bear the weight of their disdain, especially for a reason beyond my control. After a considerable period with no takers for my adoption, my parents began discussing the situation with friends and relatives. Dad happened to know someone in the neighboring town, a man running a food van with his wife. Though they were economically less fortunate than us, their desire for a child had remained unfulfilled for over a decade. Dad approached them, and without hesitation, they agreed to adopt me. The moment Dad broke this news to Mom and my sisters is etched in my memory. Their joy at the prospect of getting rid of me was palpable. Dad, however, provided a disclaimer about their financial limitations, suggesting that I might not be able to attend school. Mom, nonchalant, dismissed it, urging Dad to drop me off the next day. I stood at the corner, holding the curtain, torn between my disdain for my family and the fear and hurt of leaving them. Tears welled up, but I kept them silent. The excitement of my family overshadowed my presence. When Dad finally noticed my tears, he offered a comforting pat on my back, instructing me to pack my belongings as we would leave for my new family the next morning. Though my heart screamed, the cries went unnoticed. I packed, hoping my new family would be kinder. The next day, Dad drove me to the neighboring town. The emotions during that journey remain a blur, a numbness that enveloped me. My new family, indeed financially modest, had a tiny house with one room. They had converted a storehouse into my living space. It was small, but at least I had a room, a luxury I never enjoyed before. My belongings found a home in a tiny closet at the corner. My new parents, Mary and John, greeted me with warmth and affection, qualities unfamiliar to me, coming from a disturbed household. Doubts lingered, and I resisted getting attached, fearing another abandonment. It took months for me to realize that their love was genuine. Despite discontinuing school that year due to the mid-session move, they promised to enroll me the following year. Witnessing their relentless efforts to save money for my education endeared them to me. In time, I reciprocated their love. My adoption, initially viewed as a curse, turned out to be a blessing. My biological parents never reappeared, allowing me to embrace my true identity as a boy. Mary and John, diligent and hardworking, devoted 14 to 16 hours a day to their food truck, located just outside their modest apartment. During the times when John and Mary were engrossed in their work, I wasn't left to fend for myself. Through my bedroom window, I had a clear view of their activities. Gradually, I found myself spending my days on the food truck, lending a hand wherever I could. When I entered school, my focus shifted to studies, yet I continued aiding them with chores during my free moments. By the age of 10, I was assisting John at the cash counter, showcasing an early proficiency in calculations. Business and accounting became familiar territories for me. Post-high school, a burning desire to run their business full-time emerged within me. However, both John and Mary insisted that I complete my college education first. They generously funded my studies, recognizing the need for formal education. As they aged and grew frail, I yearned to assume their responsibilities as they had done for me. Still, they reassured me they could manage for a few more years and urged me to pursue higher education. My college focus was on business and accounting, driven by my ultimate aspiration to become an entrepreneur. Graduation day marked a pinnacle of joy, with John and Mary celebrating as if over the moon. Despite inviting my biological parents to the convocation, they failed to attend. Post-college, my eagerness to take over the food van and allow John and Mary to retire clashed with their plans for me. Accumulating substantial savings, they handed it over to me, encouraging me to start my own business. Overwhelmed by their gesture, I hesitated to blindly spend the money. Drawing upon my business acumen, I scouted for a struggling local eatery in a prime location. After numerous rejections, I secured a lease on a profit-sharing model. Starting from scratch, I revamped the place and menu to cater to the tastes of millennials and Gen Z. By providing exceptional services, sales soared, yielding a twofold profit on the initial investment within a year. 4 years into this venture, I now proudly oversee 3 successful cakes in town. I upgraded John and Mary to a better apartment while securing a modest place for myself. Despite urging them to retire the food truck for their happiness, they insisted on continuing. Leaving their house with a suitcase, I never envisioned myself as a college graduate. Yet here I am, running flourishing restaurant chains in town. Fast forward to last month, a routine day at work turned extraordinary when I spotted a familiar face at the cash counter of one of my restaurants. It felt like encountering a ghost. My biological father, absent for almost 2 decades. Despite the presence of customers, I said nothing, leading him to a quiet corner. His appearance stirred up the haunting memories of my tumultuous childhood. The detailed account of my past wouldn't have unfolded if my biological parents hadn't reappeared in my life. He expressed immense happiness and pride in witnessing my success, leaving me speechless and numb. According to him, he had met John, who shared the news of my prosperous venture while passing by. He mentioned plans to bring my mom over for the weekend. Uncertain of how to respond, I remained silent, and he departed shortly after. Later that day, I approached John, expressing my reluctance to meet my biological parents, who had disowned me for being a boy. I harbored memories of a distressing childhood and contemplated running away for the weekend. Mary insisted on forgiveness and moving forward, urging me to meet them. Reluctantly, I agreed, setting the condition that Mary and John be present during the encounter. On the arranged weekend, my biological parents arrived at John's house. Instead of an apology, they displayed no remorse, focusing on counting the favors they believed they had bestowed upon me. My mother asserted that I should be thankful for finding good parents in John and Mary, who had raised me to be successful. Despite my inner turmoil, Mary's reassuring hand gesture prompted me to diplomatically express gratitude for having them as my parents. The meeting felt awkward, leaving me unsettled. The next day, a call from my mother, whose voice I hadn't recognized in 2 decades, unveiled a demand for money. She explained their financial struggles, detailing Dad's job loss and her own challenges in securing employment as a 50-year-old waitress. Facing mounting pressure from friends to repay borrowed money, she sought $20,000 to cover essential expenses. Though I promised to consider it, doubts lingered about their sincerity. Despite my reservations and conflicted feelings, I eventually discussed the situation with Mary and John. While Mary expressed happiness at my willingness to help, she advised caution. John, sharing my concerns, feared potential emotional exploitation. After much contemplation, I decided to take a gamble and transfer the money to her account, hoping to assist my family in need. Contrary to my initial sense of accomplishment, a week later, my mother called again, leaving me with mixed feelings about their intentions and the financial help I provided. She expressed her gratitude for the assistance and then mentioned that my sisters were eager to meet me. In that moment, I sensed a genuine desire from my family to reconnect. Despite the wrongs my parents had committed during my childhood, I harbored no ill feelings towards my sisters. As a small child, I may have done some mischievous things, but as I grew up, I never held them responsible. I even entertained the thought that my parents might have let me go due to financial struggles rather than malice. When Mom suggested meeting on the upcoming Sunday and I offered to drive home, she proposed an alternative, meeting somewhere outside. I agreed without dwelling too much on it. After the call, a sense of uneasiness lingered. Why didn't she want me to visit home? Meeting family after so many years? Wouldn't it be more natural to call them home instead of opting for a restaurant? Nevertheless, she sent me the details of the restaurant, and it turned out to be one of the fanciest in town. At that moment, my focus was on the fact that they didn't invite me home. I joined them at the restaurant, and the reunion with my sisters brought a momentary sense of happiness. However, when the menu arrived, they began ordering the priciest items, seeking the most expensive dishes. When my father remarked, "Order the most expensive one," my son is a big man now, it felt mean-spirited and wicked. As they indulged in the lavish feast, I found myself footing the bill, a situation that left me contemplating wild thoughts like ghosting them before settling it. However, that seemed too severe. I resolved not to fall into their emotional trap again, sitting coldly through the rest of the evening. They didn't seem to notice my detachment. As they left, there was no invitation to visit home. Instead, my elder and sister inquired about the next dining destination. I faked a smile, bid them goodbye, and returned home to share my experience with Mary. Mary, a kind and independent woman, found their behavior disturbing. She advised me not to be a fool, not to dwell on them, and to focus on my own life. I heeded her counsel, not responding to my sisters or mother when they called. After 2 months of silence, it appeared they got the hint that I didn't want them in my life. In the subsequent update, I acknowledged the support and shared my decision to stop responding to my sisters and biological parents, realizing they seemed interested only in money. However, after 5 months, my mother called again, attempting small talk that felt fake and insincere. When she eventually disclosed that my sisters had to drop out of college due to financial struggles and asked me to fund their education, I couldn't contain my frustration. Despite her plea for help, I remained firm in my decision to distance myself from their intentions. I was at work during that call and wanted to keep a clear head, so I decided to hang up. However, she persisted, calling again in the evening. Initially ignoring her calls, I realized that avoidance wasn't a solution. The next time she called, I answered. She immediately delved into discussing my sister's eagerness to rejoin college and inquired about my payment plan, whether in a lump sum or semester-wise. She suggested transferring the entire amount to her, and she would handle the tuition before each semester. I interrupted her, expressing my reluctance to make any payments. To her surprise, I firmly stated that I had no intention of contributing. She inquired about the refusal, suggesting installment payments, but I reiterated my stance, emphasizing that my elder sister's education wasn't my responsibility, particularly given my parents' abandonment. I pointed out the opportunistic nature of their sudden interest in me due to my financial standing. This incited her anger, and she retorted that I owed them for bringing me into the world, asserting my duty to care for them. Although I had much to say, my words fell on deaf, narcissistic ears. I acknowledged my gratitude to my actual parents, John and Mary, who had earned the titles of mom and dad through their love and care. In contrast, my biological parents had no place in my life. They had discarded me at the age of 6. As she hurled abuses, I simply responded with the wrong number and hung up. Regardless of how I may be labeled, I refused to squander my hard-earned money on a so-called family that had abandoned me. Addressing a comment from the previous updates about calling John and Mary by their names instead of mom and dad, I clarified that I indeed referred to them as mom and dad. The usage of names in the narrative was for the sake of storytelling. John and Mary, my true parents, held a special place in my heart. As for my biological parents, they didn't exist for me. Moving on to the next story, I discovered my wife's infidelity with someone she met at a convention. We had shared a love for all things nerdy, bonded over gaming, anime, and conventions. However, despite our seemingly strong connection, I unearthed her betrayal and took decisive action. 5 years into our marriage, the foundation we had built on mutual interests and passions seemed solid. We both reveled in nerdy activities, from gaming to discussing the latest chapters of manga like Legend of Zelda and One Piece. Our love for each other grew rapidly, leading to a fast-tracked marriage. Our wedding, brimming with nerdy charm, celebrated our shared interests. Due to work constraints and financial considerations, attending conventions had become a rare occurrence for us. Wanting to make our 5-year anniversary special, I decided to surprise her with tickets to a renowned Comic-Con. It was a dream event for many enthusiasts, and her joy upon receiving the surprise was palpable. However, this seemingly idyllic scenario took an unexpected turn. I always struggled to gauge women's interest, often realizing it only in hindsight. This pattern persisted even with my wife, as it took 3 extensive conversations on Discord for me to grasp her feelings and desire to know me better. When we attended a convention together, things seemed enjoyable. A woman dressed as slave Princess Leia complimented my stormtrooper costume, which I hastily put together. Unaware of her advances, my wife, noticing the attention, expressed her frustration at my obliviousness. As the convention unfolded, we joined a meetup where a guy, dressed as Han Solo, engaged in conversation with my wife, also portraying Princess Leia. Their interaction intensified, causing me to step in and mention my role as the husband. Although he acknowledged me politely, he avoided eye contact. Confronting my wife later, she insisted there was nothing amiss, attributing his friendliness to a shared interest in Star Wars. Believing her, I brushed off the incident. The next day, my wife fell ill, prompting me to leave and return later with a gift. However, she grew distant, responding minimally to messages. Concerned, I approached our room, hearing unsettling sounds upon arrival. Dismissing it as my wife's activities, I entered to find her seemingly guilty. Confronting her revealed nothing, and I chose to overlook the incident. The convention ended, but our relationship strained. She worked longer hours, became distant, and avoided spending time together. Suspicious, I noticed her Discord notifications were off, a deviation from our usual communication. Curiosity led me to check her phone, discovering messages from the guy she met at the Star Wars meetup. The exchange involved flirtatious messages, photo sharing, and even discussions about role-playing. Suppressing my anger, I pretended ignorance when she inquired about my well-being. Internally seething, I decided to research divorce options, contemplating a way to expose her betrayal and make her aware of my knowledge. I informed her about an upcoming convention, explaining that I couldn't attend but she was welcome to go. Despite the excitement in her eyes, the realization hit me: my partner, the person I wanted to spend my life with, had discarded me. It was a devastating blow, but I concealed my emotions. On the day of the convention, I executed my plan after researching the guy she had been closely working with. Wearing a mask to conceal my identity, I located them right in front of her favorite voice actors. Observing them closely, I watched as they got in line. When they approached the voice actors, she pulled the man closer, sharing a kiss. That's when I intervened, removing the mask and confronting her. She questioned my actions, and I accused her of cheating with him, presenting the Discord messages as evidence. The onlookers were shocked by the public confrontation, but I refused to let it go. I publicly declared her as a cheater, exposing her affair with the guy she had met at a convention. The celebrity present decided to take a break and left the scene, leaving my wife in tears, pleading for understanding. However, I remained resolute, citing her lies about going alone and uncovering her secret meetings and late nights at the office. Seeking solace in my decision, I refused to listen to her explanations. Upon returning home, I gathered my belongings, stayed at a hotel, and initiated contact with an attorney for divorce proceedings. Despite her attempts to convince me to embrace an open relationship, I remained steadfast in wanting only her. My actions gained attention on social media as someone recorded and shared the embarrassing confrontation. Proceeding with the divorce, I obtained the house and belongings, eventually selling them to escape the painful memories. Uninterested in her fate, the nerd community widely discussed the incident, creating a significant buzz on platforms like Twitter. Her boss eventually discovered the situation, but my focus shifted towards my ongoing quest for love, steering clear of a relationship with a cheating partner like her.
It appears our working styles just aren't compatible. Starting tomorrow, there's no need for you to come in, I declared, feeling I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't continue working under such leadership any longer, so I made my decision on the spot. Understood. I'll tender my resignation effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity, I replied calmly, though inside I lamented leaving a job I once cherished. As I adjusted to the hectic pace of my days, a new clerk approached me with news of a visitor. Curious, I made my way to the reception room, where I found Samantha waiting. "John, please reconsider returning to our company," Samantha implored, surprising me with her humility. Gone was the stern, demanding figure I once knew. "My name is John Baker, and I have been dedicated to our boutique couture shop in this small town for 20 years. Despite its couture label, our clientele for bespoke items has diminished, prompting us to expand our offerings to include suits, shirts, and even school uniforms to sustain our business. Despite the changing landscape, I've always cherished our shop for its strong community roots and values. However, the atmosphere shifted when our long-standing president fell ill. He was the visionary behind our establishment, but as his health declined, his granddaughter Samantha Smith, with no prior industry experience, assumed leadership. While the transition occurred smoothly, Samantha's approach to management left much to be desired. I found myself particularly singled out by her harsh scrutiny. "Samantha, how are our sales faring recently? I urge you to secure new contracts promptly," she demanded, clearly irritable. "I've been actively seeking opportunities, but it's challenging to attract clients interested in culture. The decline in demand is evident, and our traditional couture model is facing challenges," I explained, attempting to provide context. However, Samantha's response was unforgiving. "I don't want excuses. It's not a matter of impossibility, it's a matter of effort. Until you bring in new contracts, merely servicing existing clients won't suffice. I expect you to expand our client base, she retorted with a heavy sigh, leaving little room for discussion. Don't assume you're here indefinitely. Spend more time networking outside. Don't return until you've clinched a contract, Samantha commanded, rising from her seat, her designer bag and impeccably tailored suit serving as symbols of her authority as the company's president. However, her penchant for spending work hours at spas and salons eroded the respect of her employees. Taking a break, Miss President? We have a 3:00 p.m. meeting regarding the uniforms, I interjected, only to be met with Samantha slamming her bag onto the desk with a resounding thud. A break? Let me make this clear, a president doesn't take breaks. It's frustrating to be lumped together with regular employees. Opportunities can arise unexpectedly, and it's crucial to maintain a visible presence. Think before you speak, she reprimanded sharply, before briskly making her exit, the glimmer of her ostentatious diamond necklace almost blinding in its brilliance. As the lunch break commenced, I hastily devoured my meal, reminiscing about the days when leisurely lunches were the norm before the previous president's departure. Since Samantha assumed control, the luxury of idle chatter and shared takeout had vanished. Instead, there was an unrelenting emphasis on performance metrics and contract acquisition, with Samantha often remarking, "If you have time for lunch, you have time to sell." It was a stark departure from the camaraderie we once shared, leaving me wistful for those bygone days. However, sentimentality must take a backseat today. Amidst my packed schedule of client visits, securing a new contract is imperative. While skipping pleasantries with established clients could potentially increase sales visits, I remain steadfast in my belief that nurturing personal connections is paramount. There's a unique joy in collaborating with trusted tailors and selecting couture pieces together, fostering a sense of trust that transcends mere transactions. It's these enduring relationships that compel customers to invest in our culture for their special occasions. Despite the pressing time constraints, I ensure to extend genuine greetings to our suppliers and loyal clientele. Visiting the home of an elderly customer who had entrusted me with her granddaughter's wedding couture, I inquire of the recent nuptials. The warmth in her recounting of the celebration and her satisfaction with our couture fills me with genuine happiness. When she entrusted me with her other granddaughter's wedding attire, it was truly a moment of joy. As the day unfolds, the dwindling time leaves little opportunity to pursue potential clients, resulting in a lack of new contracts secured. With the clock striking 2, I reluctantly begin my return to the office, knowing I must hurry to make it in time for the impending meeting. Each step feels heavier with the weight of unfulfilled expectations. Upon my return, Samantha's probing words greeted me, igniting a sense of dread. Her assumption that I must have secured a contract due to my absence from slacking off left me speechless. Samantha's presence, unusually early for once, seemed to amplify the tension in the room, threatening to unravel my composure. My hesitant response only seemed to exacerbate Samantha's displeasure as she kicked the desk, her voice escalating in frustration. "No results? You're becoming a liability to the company. Perhaps it's time you started looking for a new job. There's no shortage of skilled individuals, unlike someone in their 40s with no discernible talents." Her words stung, fueling my irritation as I reluctantly shared the modest progress I had achieved. Despite the positive feedback from a client who expressed interest in utilizing our services again, Samantha's reaction was far from encouraging. "And when will this potential sale materialize? How many items? At what price point? Is this a one-time occurrence or a recurring agreement?" Samantha's interrogation continued, her tone devoid of warmth or understanding, further deepening my frustration. "Listen, you seem to confuse socializing with sales. Sales isn't complete until the product is delivered and the invoice is sent. It serves us no purpose to inflate the significance of your casual conversations and boast about them." Though I felt the urge to retort against Samantha's assertion, the reality remained that I had failed to secure any new contracts. Determined to prove her wrong, I resolved to redouble my efforts and secure a contract the following day. As I began organizing for the impending meeting, Samantha unexpectedly interjected. "Change of plans. I have an appointment to attend, so let's postpone the meeting report until tomorrow," Samantha announced, already preparing to leave. Caught off guard, I couldn't help but question her decision. "Wait a moment, I was under the impression we had a meeting scheduled for today. If we don't confirm and proceed with the orders now, we risk missing deadlines." Your presence as the president is crucial. Is this appointment truly unavoidable? I queried, met with an unmistakably irritated expression from Samantha. It's an important dinner engagement. I don't have time to spare on this matter, so I'm leaving now, Samantha asserted, her tone brisk as she made her way towards the exit. Just before departing, she turned back to address me. Remember, your job isn't finished after the meeting. Once the orders are placed, go out and secure at least one new contract. And don't expect any overtime pay, so give it your all, Samantha remarked with a hearty laugh before exiting, leaving behind a puzzled meeting attendee who had expected the president's presence. However, I managed to reassure them and salvage the situation. In our small-scale company, trust is paramount. This was a principle instilled by the previous president, who led by example, always attending sales meetings and diligently overseeing deliveries. It was this commitment to service that garnered trust from our community, sustaining our business thus far. Yet lately, I sensed a decline in that trust. Determined to restore it, I resolved to handle the situation with integrity and secure orders as usual. After seeing off our business partners and gaining their understanding, I immediately began preparations for further sales visits. I'll be stepping out for a while, so feel free to leave when you're ready. Thank you all for today, I announced to my colleagues, eager to take proactive steps towards rebuilding trust in our company. It was already nightfall, the workday long over, as I exchanged greetings with a few remaining colleagues before embarking on my sales rounds. The following day, I arrived at the office with renewed vigor. The previous day's cold calls had yielded promising results. I had engaged with a potential client interested in revamping their company's uniforms. Though not a major corporation, our conversation flowed smoothly, culminating in the agreement of a contract on the spot. While the initial order only encompassed summer apparel and winter sweaters, the prospect of nurturing this client relationship could lead to lucrative opportunities, including renewals and referrals to other businesses. Aware of the potential of such connections, I felt buoyant, anticipating a positive report to Samantha. However, my optimism was short-lived. Samantha, who arrived slightly late, summoned me immediately. "John, don't we have a report from yesterday's meeting? And I want to hear about your subsequent activities." "Certainly, I'll provide the report now," I responded, approaching Samantha with a sense of eagerness. Yet, upon reaching her, I noticed her rubbing her temples wearily. "Are you all right? You seem unwell, Miss President." "Just proceed," was her curt reply. A faint odor of alcohol lingered in the air, indicating she had indulged until the early hours and was now feeling the effects. Seeing Samantha in such a state left me incredulous. Despite my astonishment, I succinctly recounted the events of the previous day. We proceeded with the order as usual for this year. There was some negotiation on price, but they understood that it wouldn't change moving forward, and then... "Wait a minute, they requested a discount, didn't they?" "And you resisted, insisting on raising prices," Samantha interjected, her bloodshot eyes fixed on me with intensity. "No, that's not the case. While we ideally would adjust prices to account for inflation, given that we're offering similar products to other companies, it's challenging to implement such changes without impacting their profit margins. Unfortunately, they weren't receptive to that idea," I clarified, bracing for Samantha's reaction. Infuriated by my response, Samantha lashed out. "That's precisely why they're taking advantage of us. We need to assert ourselves like they do. What's your plan? It's not about their profits. Our profitability should be the priority." Though she held the title of president, I couldn't align with Samantha's viewpoint. While assertive negotiation is crucial, prioritizing one party's profit over the other can be detrimental, particularly in intercompany transactions. Recognizing that further debate would only escalate tensions, I proceeded with my report from the previous day. "We'll reassess the pricing structure moving forward. Additionally, I'm pleased to report that we secured a new contract," I announced, hoping to garner at least a modicum of approval from Samantha. "Not bad. What's the projected profit margin?" Samantha inquired, displaying a faint glimmer of interest. "We've acquired an order for summer clothing and winter sweaters from a small-sized company with a few dozen employees. While it's not a monumental contract, it represents a promising foothold for potential future opportunities," I explained, eager to highlight the potential for growth. However, Samantha's response was disheartening. "Is that all? And it's not even culture? It seems your efforts outside of regular work hours have yielded little." "Truly disappointing," Samantha remarked, her words piercing through my optimism. At that moment, I felt a surge of frustration and disillusionment wash over me, reaching my breaking point. "Excuse me, but it seems you misunderstand the nature of this job. It's the relationships and connections we cultivate that drive our success, not just immediate profits," I asserted firmly, challenging Samantha's narrow focus. Though taken aback by my boldness, Samantha quickly reverted to her usual haughty demeanor. "Understood. It appears we're not compatible." "You needn't come in from tomorrow," Samantha declared, drawing a decisive line. I had reached my breaking point. Continuing under such leadership was untenable. "Understood. I resign effective today." "Thank you for the opportunity," I responded without hesitation, knowing that I couldn't continue in an environment that disregarded the importance of meaningful connections. With that, the decision was made for me to leave the job I once loved. Alone in the empty room, I grappled with uncertainty about my future. Despite leaving abruptly, I had nowhere to turn. My modest salary had left me with little in savings, and the prospect of financial instability loomed large. Then, unexpectedly, a familiar name flashed across my smartphone screen: Tom Wilson. We had attended college together, sharing fond memories and occasional outings. Though our interactions had dwindled in recent years, the call from an old friend filled me with hope. "Long time no see, how have you been?" Tom's voice carried warmth and familiarity, offering a glimmer of comfort in my moment of uncertainty. "Indeed, it's been too long. I'm doing well." "You sound great too, John," Tom greeted me warmly, though his next words cast a shadow over our conversation. "How's work?" "Knowing you, John, I'd imagine you're excelling as a capable leader with a strong support network." "It's a bit complicated. I've actually been unemployed for a while now," I confessed, feeling a pang of disappointment even in Tom's sympathetic response. Despite his usual upbeat demeanor, Tom seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "It's been challenging," I added, trying to lighten the mood. "It must have been tough. Let's not dwell on it over the phone. How about we meet up for drinks? It's a sudden invitation, but what do you say about today?" Tom proposed, and I eagerly accepted. The prospect of catching up with an old friend was a welcome distraction, and I felt a deep-seated need to confide in someone. We settled on a pub we used to frequent and agreed to meet later that day. I was taken aback. "You clashing with the president and leaving the company in such a dramatic fashion. You used to avoid conflicts at all costs, always quick to apologize even when it wasn't warranted," Tom remarked, genuinely surprised by my recent upheaval. I was surprised myself. But I couldn't reconcile with the new president's approach. It's one thing not to understand the intricacies of fieldwork, but disregarding the needs of clients and partners entirely was a deal-breaker. I explained, grateful for Tom's receptive ear. Despite years of distance between us, I was comforted by the familiarity and openness of our conversation. "Did you always work in sales at that company?" Tom inquired, delving deeper into my professional history. Sales was certainly a big part of my role, but I also dabbled in website development and attempted to introduce new products. It was enjoyable, but unfortunately, budget constraints hindered our progress. I explained to Tom while showing him the company's website on my smartphone, proudly revealing that I had created it myself. "Did you really design this?" I assumed it was outsourced. "It's just as professional as any other site," Tom marveled, impressed by my handiwork. The previous president emphasized the importance of a website that would appeal to younger demographics, so I dedicated myself to learning. While couture is undeniably beautiful, the industry is facing challenges. I had to think outside the box, I elaborated, recalling the efforts I had invested in the project. "But with our company's size, there are limitations," Tom observed, leaning in attentively as I continued. "True, but I had ideas that I wasn't able to fully realize," I confessed, seizing the opportunity to share my aspirations with Tom. "The demand for everyday culture may be declining, but there's a growing need for attire for special occasions and social media appearances. By focusing on these niche markets and catering to inbound demand, I believe we can chart a successful course forward," I explained passionately, articulating my vision for the future. Indeed, I had aspirations beyond just culture. I envisioned introducing high-quality leather goods under our brand at a slightly lower price point. Offering consumers affordable yet luxurious products would not only be appreciated but could also yield substantial profit margins. "We can't rely solely on thin margins to sustain our business," I explained to Tom, elaborating on my vision for diversification. Tom listened intently, his arms crossed as he contemplated my words. "So, is it the lack of initial investment, or did you abandon the idea due to insufficient funds? It was a combination of both, along with the current president's strong opposition, I admitted. She argued that culture shop shouldn't stray into other ventures. I understood her desire to preserve the legacy of the previous owner's cherished culture shop without deviating from tradition. However, it's becoming increasingly difficult to resist the inevitable changes brought about by time and the declining industry. I had hoped to inject new ideas into the company, but they weren't well received. Finishing his beer in one gulp, Tom turned to me with a serious expression. John, how about joining my company? I'll offer you a fixed salary equivalent to what you were earning, plus commission on sales. It's a pretty good deal, don't you think? His eyes held a sense of determination. I was taken aback by Tom's offer to join his company. I had known he was running his own brand as a sole proprietor, primarily online without a physical store. But I never imagined he could afford to hire someone like me. When I expressed my surprise and sought confirmation, Tom chuckled and reassured me, "You underestimate me. While my main business operates online, relying on outsourcing alone isn't sustainable in the long run. It's time for expansion, and I believe bringing you on board is the right move." He leaned in, whispering the impressive turnover of his store and his monthly earnings, leaving me in shock. The amount he made in a month far exceeded my yearly income. "So, I'm looking forward to having you join us. I'll be counting on you starting next week," Tom concluded, and we agreed to formalize the contract later, sealing my employment at his company. Upon joining Tom's company, I wasted no time in making an impact. I revamped the website, making product searches easier and more intuitive. The result was a tenfold increase in page views almost immediately. Additionally, I introduced suits and leather accessories to augment the range of products, which had previously consisted mainly of t-shirts. The quality and usability of these new additions were well received, and positive word of mouth quickly translated into increased sales that outstripped those of the t-shirts. Hey, the orders just keep pouring in, but production can't keep up. Can you help us out?" Tom exclaimed, overwhelmed by the surge in demand. Offering high-quality products at affordable prices, coupled with the brand reliability he had built over time, I felt a sense of fulfillment being able to implement ideas that were previously hindered by budget constraints. As purchase notifications continued to flood in on the tablet, I realized production was nearing its limit, leaving Tom both pleased and scratching his head. "Your former company let go of a real talent. It's not just about timing or environment, it takes skill. But I appreciate the compliment," I admitted humbly, reflecting on the journey that led me to this moment of success alongside Tom. As my smartphone rang, displaying Samantha's name on the screen, I couldn't help but feel a pang of apprehension. Curiosity got the better of me, and I nervously answered the call. "Hello, John. Something terrible has occurred. Can you return? I need you back right away. Is that possible?" Samantha's voice sounded more frantic than I had ever heard it, prompting me to listen intently. "What's happened?" I inquired, my concern growing with each passing moment. "Our couture clientele has threatened to take their business elsewhere if you're not present. Additionally, our partners are specifically requesting your involvement, and the company website is experiencing ongoing issues due to a lack of updates. Can you return promptly to assist?" Even though I had parted ways with the company, I responded courteously. "I understand the urgency, but I don't believe it's appropriate for me to directly engage with clients anymore. However, I'm willing to address the website and system issues on my next day off. I didn't formally hand over that responsibility, so I accept full responsibility for any oversights," I explained calmly, attempting to offer a reasonable solution. Despite my efforts to accommodate, Samantha's response indicated dissatisfaction. "What do you mean? Just come back. Considering everything the company has done for you, why are you hesitating?" Samantha's tone was a mix of urgency and frustration. "I was let go from the company. Are you suggesting a rehire?" I questioned, trying to clarify the situation. "Don't be so arrogant. I assume you're struggling financially now, right? I can offer you the same salary as before, so there's no need to worry," Samantha retorted, her tone dripping with condescension. "Apologies for the interruption," Tom interjected, unable to contain his laughter. He mimed a gesture of encouragement, silently urging me to stand my ground against Samantha's presumptuous offer. "Do you have any idea about my current salary? I likely earn in a month what you make in a year. In fact, my current salary could surpass the annual revenue of my former company within just a few months," I calmly asserted, making it clear that financial incentives weren't a compelling reason for me to return to my old workplace. Despite cherishing memories from my previous job, I found fulfillment in my current position and had no desire to work under such leadership again. After politely bidding Samantha farewell, I ended the call. Since joining Tom's company, our operations had grown exponentially. With my contributions, we forged partnerships with outsourcing firms and attracted new talent, leading to rapid expansion. Witnessing the success of products I helped develop being embraced by consumers and shared across social media, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Amidst my hectic schedule, I was interrupted by a message from a newly hired clerk informing me of a visitor. Intrigued, I made my way to the reception room, where I was surprised to find Samantha waiting. "John, I'm begging you, please reconsider coming back to our company," Samantha pleaded, her desperation palpable. Despite her earnest plea, I remained resolute in my decision to move forward and declined her offer. "What happened?" "Let's hear the details first," I urged Samantha, guiding her to sit on the sofa. She appeared visibly worn out, a stark contrast to her once vibrant demeanor. "Since you left, we've been hemorrhaging customers. It's not just individual clients. Even our corporate partnerships are crumbling. I can barely cover the employees' salaries anymore. If things continue like this, we'll be forced to shut down the shop." "I need your help," Samantha confessed, her voice tinged with desperation. While I couldn't help but sympathize with Samantha's plight, it was clear that she had brought this situation upon herself by prioritizing profits over communication and relationship building. It was inevitable that partners would abandon ship if they felt neglected. "I'd like to assist, but I'm currently overwhelmed with responsibilities at my current company. I'm sorry, but I can't offer you immediate help," I responded, regret lacing my words. In a last-ditch effort, Samantha implored me for assistance, clutching at straws. "Samantha, it's time to gather your strength. Have you exhausted all possible avenues? Now is the moment to take decisive action. Rebuilding trust requires face-to-face interactions, understanding their needs, and showing empathy for their concerns. Please dedicate yourself to what you've neglected until now. It's the only way forward," I advised firmly yet empathetically. With newfound resolve, Samantha wiped away her tears and nodded resolutely. "You're right. I've made mistakes, but I'll start rectifying them from this moment onward." As I reflected on Samantha's plea for help, I couldn't shake the feeling of powerlessness that gripped me. Despite my genuine desire to assist, the prospect of starting anew seemed daunting and nearly impossible. Thoughts of the predecessor, to whom I owed so much, weighed heavily on my mind. I was determined to prevent the beloved company from succumbing to bankruptcy, but amidst the demands of my current responsibilities, I struggled to conceive of any actionable solutions. Frustrated, I bit my lip, grappling with the enormity of the situation. Several years had passed since I joined Tom's company, and during that time, our growth had been exponential. With each expansion came an increase in the number of companies we engaged with. "John, what do you think of this?" "I believe it would be perfect for an important dinner date," Samantha proposed eagerly, seeking my opinion. "It's fantastic. Exactly as I envisioned, and the fabric is exquisite," I replied, genuinely impressed. The response to our announcement on social media was overwhelmingly positive, culminating in a significant order placement. "We'd like to place an order worth $50,000 with your company for now." "Thank you so much," the client expressed their gratitude. Following this successful transaction, the performance of Tom's company soared to new heights, prompting the establishment of new departments and the hiring of additional staff. I played a pivotal role in developing hit products, particularly in the suit department. By infusing culture designs and fabrics as accents into our suits, we garnered praise not only from domestic customers but also from international clientele, expanding our market rapidly. The challenge of securing a steady supply of quality fabric and forging connections with culture-focused companies led me to reach out to Samantha for assistance. To my surprise, Samantha not only sourced the fabric we needed, but also provided invaluable consumer-oriented suggestions, resulting in a product that exceeded our initial expectations. "I truly appreciate your help, Samantha." "Thank you," I expressed my gratitude, noting the slight blush that colored Samantha's cheeks. "Have my efforts made a difference? I've learned so much from you, John." Despite holding the title of president, I realize now how misguided I was in my approach. I was consumed by a desire to assert my authority in an industry I knew little about. It was a grave mistake. but thanks to your guidance, I've learned the importance of fostering relationships with employees and partners, ultimately earning the trust of the community. I'm confident that my company will continue to thrive, Samantha reflected sincerely. Meanwhile, Tom, who had always been immersed in his work, found himself embarking on a new chapter as he tied the knot with a significant partner. As I witnessed Tom's happiness on his wedding day, I couldn't help but share in the joy as if it were my own. "Congratulations, you're absolutely radiant," I exclaimed, admiring Tom's appearance. "Well, it's all thanks to the impeccable design of this suit. I just hope I can live up to its elegance," Tom replied with a chuckle. Sharing in the laughter, we exchanged heartfelt wishes, savoring a moment of joy that illuminated the routine of our everyday lives and transformed a fleeting occasion into a cherished memory. It was a reminder of the transformative power of clothing, and I felt privileged to be part of an industry that wielded such influence. With renewed determination, I resolved to continue crafting work that brought beauty and joy to the lives of others.
Thank you for looking after our little one for the past week. I'll be picking him up today. What? We weren't home. Sophia's sister-in-law's voice on the other end of the line sounded shaken. Wait, where is my son right now? Sophia's concern spiked. My name is Sophia, a 34-year-old stay-at-home mom. I've been married to John for 4 years. Last year, we moved in with John's parents to help care for his dad, Matthew, who was struggling with his legs, and his mom, Victoria, who became his primary caregiver. We thought it would be too much for Victoria to handle both housework and caregiving, so John and I offered to move in. At first, they were hesitant, but eventually welcomed the idea. John's brother, James, works for a global company and is currently abroad on business. That's why John, being the younger son, felt it was his responsibility to stay close to his parents and initiated the move. Living in my in-laws' house, I had no complaints. Victoria always appreciated my cooking and help with chores. They treated me kindly, and I always felt serene in their presence. John has always been kind-hearted, much like his parents. Living together was enjoyable until tragedy struck. Matthew's health deteriorated, and he passed away at the hospital. His death deeply affected Victoria and John. We held a funeral where many people attended, including James, who came back from abroad. John, Sophia, thank you for taking on so much responsibility as the eldest son. James expressed his gratitude during the difficult time. I should have been the one to stay with Dad. Don't worry about it, bro. Your job overseas is important. That's right. I found happiness living with Matthew and Victoria. Thanks, both of you. I have to head back to my assignment, so please continue to look after Mom. James expressed gratitude before leaving, clearly feeling bad about not being more involved. He seemed sorry for not participating in household affairs after Matthew's passing. Despite James's departure, we continued living with Victoria, not just because he asked us to, but out of genuine concern for her well-being now that she was alone. Victoria appeared deeply saddened since the funeral, and both John and I were cautious in our interactions with her, not wanting to overwhelm her. We carried on as usual, being attentive to her needs. Gradually, Victoria started feeling better. Thanks, both of you. I'm okay now. Sorry for worrying you, she said, smiling warmly. Both John and I were relieved to see Victoria back to her old self. From then on, the three of us lived peacefully as a family. However, a new source of tension emerged in the form of Olivia, my brother-in-law's wife. Hello, looking forward to another great day, she would say, dropping off her son Alexander frequently. Alexander was a well-behaved 5-year-old, and Olivia believed leaving him with us would be a good distraction for Victoria, who had recently lost Matthew. While Victoria enjoyed spending time with her grandchild, Olivia's constant dropping off of Alexander became exhausting. Olivia claimed she couldn't take care of him during her part-time weekend work, insisting that Victoria, now free from caregiving responsibilities, should accommodate him. Although Olivia's assertion wasn't entirely wrong, it didn't make it acceptable for her to impose her child on us without considering our plans. I wonder why she doesn't work during the weekdays when Alexander is at preschool. That way, she could pick him up after work. It's puzzling. Do you think my brother knows about this? I mean, if he's in a global company, does she even need to work this much? John and I had that conversation when Alexander got dropped off during the weekends. John couldn't relax after work, and I had a part-time job on weekdays, so we preferred peaceful weekends with John and Victoria. Our plans would get thrown off when Olivia suddenly showed up to drop off her child. Finally, John and I asked Olivia to minimize the frequency of her visits. We have our plans too, you know. It's troublesome when you keep leaving Alexander here, John remarked. Olivia retorted defensively. Oh, what plans could possibly be more important than my job? John shot back. Why not you consider working when Alexander is at preschool? Then there's no need to leave him here. This infuriated Olivia. How terrible. You people don't care about family at all. It's sad to have relatives like you, Olivia said emotionally, screaming loudly. John and I were taken aback, but Victoria stepped in to mediate. Let it be, John. I enjoy spending time with my grandson, so it's no problem for me. Good on you, Victoria. I knew you'd say that. Alexander seems fond of you, and it's better to leave him with someone we can trust, Olivia commented with a smug look on her face. Since then, the frequency of her dropping off Alexander increased. Lately, she's even been bringing him over from preschool until the evening on weekdays. I was surprised to find Alexander at home when I returned from my part-time job. Sure, it's tough for her to look after the kid alone while James is away on a business trip. But she's definitely taking advantage of us. At this rate, we're practically taking care of Alexander half of the month. When he's with us, we often end up feeding him lunch, snacks, and sometimes even dinner. And Olivia doesn't contribute any money for food or anything. The burden keeps increasing on our end, and it didn't sit well with me. However, Victoria accepts everything, so neither John nor I could say anything further. Amidst all this, an unexpected incident occurred. The weather had been scorching hot, and the moment you step outside, you're dripping with sweat. We were all cautious, and one day, I returned home from my part-time job to find Victoria had collapsed. We immediately called an ambulance, and they confirmed it was heat stroke. Luckily, she fell just before I got home, so she was all right. But she had to be hospitalized for some time. I got so focused on housework, I didn't realize I was overheating. I'm really sorry for worrying you, Victoria apologized. It's okay, Mom. Thankfully, you're safe now. John and I reassured her, chatting with Victoria in her hospital room. We were relieved, but we had planned a family trip set to depart the day after tomorrow. If Mom's in the hospital, the trip's going to be a problem. Yeah, we'll need to cancel, we discussed. As we were discussing this, Victoria suggested, why don't you two go ahead without me? But Mom, we're worried about you. We expressed our concerns. Right. We can't just leave you behind and go, we insisted. You two always help me out, so now's the time to have some alone time as a couple. I'll be fine. I'm in a hospital, after all, Victoria encouraged us. Feeling reassured, we decided to proceed with the trip. It was a waste to pay the cancellation fee for 3 people, and maybe I could change it without having to pay anything if I'm the only one who doesn't want to go. After being encouraged so much, we decided to go on the trip as well. Since John was also on summer vacation, we got into the car early in the morning on the day of the trip and headed for our Ocean View hotel. Excited for a trip as a couple after so long, we stopped at various shops on the way and found some knickknacks that Victoria would like in a chic boutique. While thinking about grabbing some lunch at a cafe, my phone rang. It was Olivia. Sophia, why aren't you answering your phone? I called an hour ago and even sent messages, Olivia questioned. Sorry, we're out at the moment. Must be nice going out while I'm working, huh? Olivia began with her usual passive-aggressive comments. Just when I thought everything was fine, Olivia dropped the bombshell. Look, I left Alexander by the front door. Take him inside and look after him, would you? What? All right, you handle the rest. Wait, hold on a sec. I tried to say more, but she hung up the phone. Despite my attempts to call her back, it seemed she had turned off her phone. probably annoyed with my constant calling. I'd promptly discussed the situation with John. Despite today not being excessively hot, it was still summer, and leaving someone outside for hours could lead to heat stroke. Moreover, who leaves a 5-year-old alone outside? The problem was that John and I were already far from home, having left early in the morning. Seeing me panic, John calmly said, "Relax, let's think this through. I'll call my brother. He's probably off work today." With that, John called James, and fortunately, James picked up quickly. John explained the situation, and James, shocked, provided us with Olivia's parents' contact number. John then called Olivia's parents, explained the situation, and they agreed to pick up Alexander. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Olivia's parents lived only about an hour's drive from us, so they could retrieve Alexander without much trouble. Apparently, he was sitting in the shade, looking distressed. Olivia's parents quickly gave him some water and took him to their house. He was safe for now. John and I felt relieved and went on to enjoy our trip. But Olivia turned out to be one exhausting person. We agreed that we needed to give her a piece of our minds. However, what happened next was beyond our expectations. About a week later, Olivia called me, saying, "Hey, thanks for watching Alexander for a week. I'll pick him up today," as if she had done nothing wrong. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, you got heat stroke and lost your mind?" "I'm coming to pick up Alexander," I responded. "We weren't even home. We were out of state when you said you left Alexander at our doorstep," I added. Olivia was clearly shaken over the phone. "Then where is Alexander?" "He's at your parents' place," I informed her. "At my parents'? They've been watching over him," I continued. "No way." Olivia abruptly hung up, most likely heading to her parents' place. About an hour later, Olivia showed up, demanding, "Where is Alexander?" The moment she entered the living room, she was speechless. That was to be expected because there we all were. Olivia's parents, us, Victoria, and even James. "Why is everyone here?" Olivia seemed confused. Then Olivia's parents spoke up. "You really are beyond help. Mom, what's going on all of a sudden? Word is you've been dropping off Alexander at James's parents' way too often, haven't you?" "Well, I've been busy with work, so it's just on weekends," Olivia tried to excuse herself. "That's no excuse, dropping him off every single weekend," Olivia's parents chided. "I also heard from James's mother that you've been leaving him there on weekdays too." Olivia's mother and father confronted her like this. Feeling cornered by her own parents, Olivia defended herself. "I'm working, you know. It's okay for me to get a little support. Victoria and John are free anyway," Olivia reasoned. James chimed in to counter Olivia's justification. "I've been transferring you enough money, haven't I? You even said you needed more, so now I'm sending you $3,000 a month for living expenses, and you're saying that's not enough?" "Yes, that's right. $3,000 is not enough." Olivia became increasingly defiant. "Any reasonable person would think you could live quite comfortably with $3,000 a month for living expenses when it's just you and a small child," James retorted. That's when Victoria sided with Olivia. "Why don't you just stop lying?" Victoria challenged. "What? I'm not lying. You're not really working, are you?" Olivia's eyes widened at Victoria's words. "I am working." Olivia started to panic under Victoria's scrutiny. Victoria then pulled out an envelope and spread its contents on the table. "I hate to say this in front of your parents, but I've had my suspicions about you, so I had an investigation done. It turns out you've been having an affair. You met him often on the weekends, and you left Alexander with us even on weekdays when you could manage the time." Victoria began laying out photos as proof of the affair. "Stop. Don't display those pictures like that." Frantic, Olivia tried to hide the pictures. "What you've done is a betrayal to all of us. James, who's been working hard on business trips, Sophia and John, who've been caring for Alexander, and most of all, you've betrayed Alexander." Victoria continued, revealing the evidence. It seemed Olivia finally realized the gravity of her actions. Olivia broke down and apologized deeply in front of us. "I'm really sorry. Can you find it in your hearts to forgive me?" Olivia kept apologizing, but some things can't be fixed that easily. James walked up to Olivia and handed her a piece of paper. "These are divorce papers. Let's end our relationship." "I don't want a divorce." "Shouldn't have had an affair then," James replied sternly. "I'm ashamed to say you're my daughter. Stop causing trouble and just agree to the divorce." "No way," Olivia protested, but no one in the room was on her side. Eventually, Olivia signed the divorce papers, sealing the end of her marriage with James. James was granted custody of their child. He spoke to his company about the situation and decided to return to the U.S. sooner than planned. Although this cost him a potential promotion, James said life with Alexander is more important, and they're now living together in an apartment near our family home. As for Olivia, she's been sued for alimony by James and her affair partner. She was also disowned by her parents and is working desperately to pay off her monthly installments. Olivia wanted to see Alexander, but he refused. Apparently, Olivia was too absorbed in her phone to take care of him and often neglected his basic needs. Who would want to be involved with someone like that? Turns out Olivia's affair partner was also married, and now his wife is suing her as well. Even worse, he decided not to divorce, leaving Olivia with massive debt and losing everything: her child, James, and her parents. From now on, she'll live a lonely life with most of her earnings going toward alimony payment. But she brought it all on herself. It's the punishment she deserves for her betrayal. Meanwhile, John and I are living happily with Victoria, and since Alexander and James live nearby, we regularly go out for meals or have barbecues in our in-laws' backyard, enjoying quality family time. I plan to continue cherishing this family I love so much and live out my days in happiness. I am Emily, a 33-year-old office worker who tragically lost my parents in a car accident at the tender age of 8. Initially, my 5-year-old brother, Ethan, and I were taken in by our paternal grandparents. Despite their desperate efforts to raise us, the task proved challenging in their retirement years. 3 years later, I found a new home with my aunt and uncle, who became my adopted parents. The transition was nerve-wracking as I moved away from my grandparents, but my aunt and uncle welcomed me with open arms, treating me as their own. Let's slowly become a real family for us. You are already our daughter, my uncle reassured me, bringing a sense of relief. Although my new home was a 30-minute train ride away from my grandparents, I cherished the hope of visiting my brother when I got older. Being adopted into a family brought unique challenges, but I came to understand that blood relation and a parent-child relationship are not synonymous. Over time and shared experiences, I realized that a mother isn't only someone who gives birth. It's the bonds formed through love and patience. As I navigated through life with my aunt and uncle, I learned that family goes beyond blood ties. While I only shared the truth with close friends, they were surprised to discover that we weren't blood-related. A friend's mom once commended my well-adjusted upbringing, but I attributed it to the remarkable love and patience of my adoptive parents. Initially, I struggled to fully open up and was even rebellious at times. Yet, my aunt and uncle faced and accepted me with unwavering patience. Now, as an adult, I find myself wanting to give back to them. With gratitude in my heart, I joined my uncle's company, worked diligently, and have now become a supervisor, a small way of expressing my appreciation to the two people I truly consider as my parents. I maintained regular contact with my brother once we both acquired cell phones. Our communication primarily consisted of texts and calls, and I would occasionally visit him. However, after high school, our meetings became less frequent, and he would only respond to my sporadic texts. It's a common occurrence for siblings of different genders to drift apart as they age. Despite the growing distance, my brother thrived in our grandparents' house, remaining kind. Although he may have felt moments of loneliness without parents, he never caused significant worry and matured over time. Eventually, he graduated from college and secured a position in a well-known company, a source of immense pride for our grandparents and me. This year, on his 30th birthday, my brother reached out unexpectedly, expressing his desire for me to meet the woman he was marrying. While I felt a bit upstaged, the news of his impending marriage brought genuine joy. Regretfully, our grandparents, who passed away in the last 2 to 3 years, couldn't be present to celebrate. A few days later, my brother brought his fiancée, Samantha, to our house, where my aunt, uncle, and I reside. "Let me introduce you. This is Samantha, my fiancée," he proudly announced. Reflecting on our journey from losing our parents at a young age to being eventually separated, he expressed warmth in his eyes. Witnessing my brother's happy face made me feel almost maternal towards him. As he introduced Samantha, I greeted her warmly. "I'm his sister, Emily. Thank you for coming today." I couldn't help but express my happiness at seeing my little brother all grown up. My aunt and uncle also welcomed Samantha with smiles and warm greetings. "Congratulations on your engagement. I'm glad to meet Samantha too," I added. Samantha responded briskly with a smile, expressing her gratitude for the warm reception. "No, it's only natural for us to come and greet you. I also wanted to have a chat with my future sister-in-law," she said, initiating a friendly conversation. I had envisioned her as a sheltered young lady, being the daughter of a company president. However, she appeared quite capable. Ethan, being a gentle and easygoing type, perhaps complimented her well. That day, as we all introduced ourselves and chatted over cake, my aunt and uncle included, she looked directly at me with determined eyes. Amidst various questions about my single status, plans for marriage, and life as the adopted child of the family, she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, her future sister-in-law. As we exchanged contact information before parting, she later reached out, suggesting we meet at a cafe. It felt like the beginning of gaining a sister, a somewhat ticklish feeling. However, my cheerful mood took an abrupt turn as we sat down for coffee. Ethan's fiancée expressed a desire to talk with me alone. Anticipating a discussion about my brother, I reassured her that I was open to any complaints or hard-to-say things. To my surprise, that wasn't her concern. With a sigh, she gazed intently at me and said, "I have a favor to ask before we get married." Her choice of words made me apprehensive. "So, you're the adopted child of that couple and single, right?" I confirmed, taken aback by her sudden question. Then she dropped a bombshell. "Ethan is practically a stranger to you now, right? Please don't involve yourself with us after we get married. We won't invite you to the wedding since you're a stranger." Stunned, I blurted out my surprise. Just wait a minute. What is she talking about? I might be a stranger legally to my brother, but we are real siblings. I have no intention of meddling in your married life, but I do want to attend and celebrate your wedding. I've heard that no family is free of problems between daughters-in-law, mothers-in-law, or sisters-in-law. Is she trying to preemptively ward off any potential issues with me, her future sister-in-law? But I have no intention of interfering in my brother's marital life. I gently reassured her that there was no need to be so wary, but she shook her head at my words and spoke again. "Please don't misunderstand. I'm saying you're a stranger to us, family yet considered strangers." I couldn't comprehend what she was saying and tilted my head in confusion. "Ethan and you have been strangers for a long time, right? You're still unmarried and living with those elderly folks, not even on your own, being an adopted child and single. It would be troubling if you were to rely on us in the future," she declared firmly, delivering such cold words for the sister of her future spouse. Taken aback, I responded, but she continued without concern. "It's out of the question for you to rely on us after they pass away. They're still healthy, so please don't say such things. Besides, I have my own job and income. For now, if you were unemployed, I wouldn't have even come to greet you," she interrupted me, glaring. "Anyway, we won't invite you to the wedding, and you don't need to invite us to any of your family events either. Just because you're single, don't expect any future support or care from us." I felt a wave of confusion and questioned what she thought of me. Sure, I'm single now, but I have a job and savings, Considering a family member of her future spouse in such a way made me feel dizzy. I tried to express my understanding, but not even being notified about family events seemed too extreme. I understand how you feel, but not even notifying about family events seems too much. I don't think Ethan would agree. Just because we've seen less of each other as adults doesn't mean our family bond is gone, I responded firmly. Well, minimal involvement is unavoidable, I guess, but please gradually distance yourself, she said so nonchalantly, making me feel sad. I'm asking for the sake of our happy marriage. If you refuse, it might complicate our marriage. Remember, it was Ethan who wanted to marry. Think about his happiness, okay? She implied that if I didn't accept this, she might not marry Ethan. It sounded more like a unilateral ultimatum than a request. The proud smile Ethan had just days ago came to mind. While the conditions seemed unreasonable, I didn't want to interfere with my brother's marriage. Faced with her irrational demands, I was left speechless. That night, when I told my aunt and uncle about the day's events, they both found it hard to believe. Understandably so, as she seemed so pleasant when we talked the other day. I was equally shocked. Initially, I thought she didn't want a sister-in-law meddling, but it went beyond that. She insisted that we were strangers and wouldn't hear otherwise. Concerned, my uncle asked, "What will you do?" I replied, "I don't want to ruin Ethan's wedding. I'm not happy about it, but I'll skip it. Once things settle, I'll meet with Ethan alone to celebrate." I see, but if Emily is treated like that, we have no desire to attend either. My aunt nodded in agreement. Seems like the problem is on that young lady's side, isn't it? My uncle said, puzzled, and my uncle nodded with a slight smile. Then came the wedding day with a clear and blue sky. I shouldn't have been there to witness my dear brother's special day up close, but it couldn't be helped. My cell phone rang, displaying Samantha's name. I had saved her number affectionately, thinking she'd become my sister-in-law, but now she was a stranger. Feeling no obligation to answer the call, I switched to silent mode, but the calls persisted, like a persistent demon. My aunt and uncle chuckled, guessing who was calling. I wondered what kind of face Samantha, who had bluntly told me I was a stranger, was making. The calls finally stopped, but my phone's call history was filled with Samantha's name. I chuckled at the thought of her being a stalker. There were voicemails, but I didn't feel like listening to them. That afternoon, as my aunt, uncle, and I enjoyed our favorite donuts, the intercom rang insistently. When I went to the door, Samantha, Ethan's fiancée, burst in furiously. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Do you know how many times I called? Aren't you supposed to be getting married today?" she exclaimed. I calmly responded, "What do you want at a stranger's house? It's your fault the wedding's ruined." Samantha was taken aback. "Excuse me?" I smiled back unfazed. "You didn't let your uncle and aunt attend because you weren't invited." "I haven't done anything. I just didn't go to the wedding, as you told me." "That's right, you told me not to come to the wedding because I'm a stranger. Why should I answer a stranger's call?" I continued. Samantha questioned, "So, why are you here?" I replied, "Well, because your uncle here is the president of the Electrical Industry Association," and someone started saying he wasn't there. Suddenly, Ethan appeared with Samantha. "Ethan's sorry. I thought she ran off without listening to me, but she really came here." "Sorry, Emily. I didn't know anything." "What happened?" he asked. Samantha explained. "I heard from Samantha that you wouldn't attend. She said you had to meet your boyfriend's parents on this day, and it was hard for you to tell me. I thought that was understandable." I couldn't help but chuckle at the convincing lie for a reason not to attend my brother's wedding. I was impressed. Then today, when attendees noticed our uncle's absence, they started asking why the chief guest wasn't there. Someone close to our uncle mentioned that his daughter was denied attendance, and she's the groom's real sister. Samantha's parents were shocked, saying they knew nothing about it. Relatives and other guests got involved, causing a big commotion. So the wedding turned into chaos, whether it was expected or not. Biting her lip, Samantha glared at me again. "Because of you, I was criticized terribly, called inhumane. If you had answered the phone and come to the wedding, Things might have been different, you heartless person. Who's heartless here, I wonder? Uncle, who had been observing quietly, stood up and spoke. I decided not to attend on my own. Emily, in fact, wanted me to be there for her brother. I'm a businessman and currently the president of the Electrical Industry Association. I have connections with Athan's major manufacturing company and your father's component factory, but you've just ruined a good relationship. Your thoughtless actions are going to make your position and even your father's company situation very difficult. By the way, Emily is now a supervisor in our company. She's indispensable, studying technology and management every day. And she's been the secretary of the Electrical Industry Association for 2 years now, building quite a network in the industry. Samantha, who had underestimated me as a poor, troublesome single woman, opened her eyes wide, uttering a ridiculous sound. Indeed, Emily and Ethan lost their real parents when they were young. It's sadder than we can imagine. Uncle's voice was calm yet dignified. But Emily has bravely and positively carved out her life. Judging her foolishly just because she's adopted and single is far more foolish of you, Samantha. Samantha was left speechless, having no words to counter my uncle's argument. Yet again, she lashed out at me, this liar. If your uncle is such an important and wealthy person, you should have told me. Then I would have let you attend the wedding. Enough already. I sharply dismissed her childish behavior. I tried to talk about my work, but you were the one who didn't listen. Remember, we all introduced ourselves on the day we first met. You only remembered that I was single and adopted. People like you, who judge others only by their titles or appearances, end up in situations like this. I'm not living here because I can't afford to live alone. I want to be with my parents, but we are a family now. As a stranger, you should leave. Wait, you need to help me out here. I find myself unfairly portrayed as the villain in this sisterly dispute. Do something? I'm not your sister. I'm a stranger, I corrected her with a smile. I'm the adorable fiancée of your brother, so I'm like a sister, right? Despite my attempts to clarify, the conversation seemed pointless. You should take responsibility for your own words. I'll take back what I said before if you help me smooth things over, she insisted. There's nothing a stranger like me can do. Wait, goodbye then, I stated firmly. She protested, no, come on, let's go, as Ethan reluctantly led his protesting fiancé away. Afterward, Ethan and Samantha's engagement was called off, and she had to deal with the wedding cancellation fees. Despite her complaints, her parents accepted that it was her fault. Despite being the daughter of a president, her father's company was just a small factory, and maintaining relationships with Ethan's major company and my uncle's Electrical Industry Association was crucial for survival. Due to her actions, her father had to apologize profusely. Samantha, having caused such a mess, was reprimanded and not allowed to return home. She tried to stay with friends, but after the wedding fiasco, they distanced themselves and no one offered help. Ethan came to apologize, reflecting on his choices. She only liked me because I worked for a major company and had no parents to trouble her. The way she treated you like an obstacle, I hate that I couldn't see through her. Ethan slumped, and we all tried to comfort him. It's good that we weren't married yet, and she was pretty. It's not your fault for being deceived by someone who hid her true self. I reassured him. You're too kind. It's a shame about her, but someday you'll find someone who truly cares for you, I said, hopeful. Here, Ethan, your favorite donuts. Let's have some coffee, I suggested, trying to lighten the mood. This incident somehow brought me closer to Ethan, with whom I had lost touch as adults. I realized I had also been neglecting to contact my brother. The initial news of his engagement was the reason for our reunion, so in a way, I'm grateful to her. Watching Ethan and my aunt and uncle talk like a real family, I pondered these thoughts. Friends, lovers, family. Maybe we take those closest to us for granted and forget to show them care. I resolved to cherish my loved ones more. How are your loved ones doing?